Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. American Comics. I evolved into a Superman on my own. Chapter 81. A ring and a chain-like necklace. He didn't wear the collar in the previous experiment, so as long as the effect was there, it didn't matter even if it was turned into a dog collar. But when Shen Fei wears it himself, he must have a better-looking design. What's more, this necklace is different. It can limit the strength to 5 strong spectrum. Naturally, he wanted to experience this demonic power for himself. The increase in demonic power will be enhanced according to the user, and the more demonic power spectrum is added, the stronger the increase will be. He wanted to see how powerful he could punch 20 tons now. What would happen if you got an increase in demonic power? As soon as Shen Fei pressed the ring, a heat like lava spread from his palm to his whole body. Feel the power rising in your body instantly. Shen Fei nodded and came to the tester next to the laboratory, which he had built separately. The range that can be tested is not as large as that in the training room, only an alloy strength tester the size of a stall. Shen Fei made no preparations and simply threw out a punch. Boom! The alloy made a loud noise. The words, 30T, appeared on the upper display screen. One strong demonic power can increase the power by approximately 5 tons. If it is increased to 5 strong spectrum, it will probably reach 50 T. Quote. Shen Fei was still very satisfied with the test results. The key was that he not only had the power of demons, but also the aura of longevity. When Shen Fei walked out of the testing room, his eyes fell on the large tank of longevity energy in the center of the laboratory. This was the most important thing, and the power of the devil could only be regarded as a small means. The energy of longevity is the more powerful force. It's just that I don't know how to use Iron Fist. Just how to establish this kind of circuit in the body. Shen Fei didn't try immediately. If he didn't have a way to make the longevity energy circulate according to the root in Iron Fist's body, he wouldn't try. Because the chi of Shoulao was flowing according to the root before it was extracted from Iron Fist's body, and it was not like the power of demons that was impregnated in the target's body in an orderly manner. The first step in a scientific experiment is to imitate, without changing the variables too much. At present, strong magnetism can indeed bind the power of longevity, but extracting it from Iron Fist is completely different from using it in your own body. First of all, Magneto and Electro can independently create strong magnetism in their bodies, and they may not even be able to create it now. One of them came from a special place before and never learned anything. Before one gained the ability, he was still a maintenance worker and had little knowledge of the use of electricity, let alone using electricity to generate magnets. How could these two put a strong magnetic force inside, and also independently set the root of the strong magnetic force inside the body? Boss, there are a few people visiting. They said they were ordered by the professor to deliver something and they want to see you in person. Shen Fei was sitting on the chair, leaning on the back of the chair while thinking about a solution. Connors called. Professor, it seems that the gene I want has been delivered. Single quote. I'll come right away. Shen Fei still believed in Charles's character, and he probably wouldn't cause any trouble. Let people first send Black Sky and the almost useless Iron Fist back to the laboratory. Wearing a white coat, he walked directly to the Osborne Company's laboratory. According to Charles, he only knew that Project Sentinel was underway. So this should be the end of the plot of Wolverine 2. Charles rediscovered Wolverine in order to find a countermeasure to the Sentinel project. In other words, the reversal of this timeline has not yet happened. When Shen Fei reached the halfway point, he had already finished all the logic. Mystique in this timeline should have been captured by the United States to study the Sentinel robots. Although Bova did create the Sentinel robot, the first generation did show some special features at the beginning, but under the power of mutants, they were all wiped out long ago. But Mystique made a very wrong decision. She chose to assassinate Bova, but in the end, Bova obtained her transformation gene. When the Sentinel robot reaches its most advanced version, it can even deal with Omega mutants such as Iceman and Magneto. Although Shen Fei thinks these mutants have no brains. With such a huge treasure, but he has not developed his own abilities, he can only say that he deserves to die. Wrong. If Days of Future Past hadn't happened, wouldn't it mean that Apocalypse would be resurrected in Days of Future Past? So when the time comes, will my timeline continue before the reversal or after the reversal? Or should I choose to interfere? While Shen Fei was thinking, he came to the office door. Before pushing the door open, he glanced at the surveillance in the office on his mobile phone. Except for Norman and Max in the office, there are also 4 men or beasts in strange uniforms. Storm, Iceman, and Beast. Finally, there was a middle-aged man in a suit, but Shen Fei couldn't remember who this man was for a while. He seemed to be from South America. Welcome, X-Men. Shen Fei walked in with a smile. After entering, several people who were sitting were suddenly startled. Shen Fei. The leader Aurora looked at Shen Fei who walked in. She remembered that the professor told her that Shen Fei was a young man with a handsome face. It seemed that he should be him. Shen Fei's eyes fell on the last man, a South American. Soon, a figure flashed through his mind, and he murmured in his heart, "The target has appeared." Shen Fei suppressed his thoughts. He originally thought that only the X-Men he knew would appear. But suddenly I thought that Sunspot had already appeared in Days of Future Past, and had already joined the X-Men to help fight the Sentinels. It's normal to appear here now. Sunspots. This was a mutant that he wanted to analyze more than the Human Torch, but he didn't expect that Sunspot had already joined the X-Men at this time. Unfortunately, his deal was only to get the genes of Iceman, Storm, Charles, and Cyclops. If he changed his mind now, his nascent relationship with Charles would likely be lost. The ability to become stronger in the sun is right in front of my eyes. Shen Fei hesitated for a while, but gave up and immediately took action to keep Sunspot. Because now that Charles has slowly recovered, it may be difficult to directly use violent means to catch mutants. Although Charles has been committed to easing the relationship between ordinary people and mutants. But if Shen Fei used explosives to directly capture mutants, Charles's voice might appear in his mind in the middle of the night. He arrived at a bad time, when 2 factions of mutants temporarily merged due to the Sentinel Project. Otherwise, if he joins one side at will, it will be enough to capture people from the other side. It's a pity that if Xiao's body is still there, this Sunspot's ability will not be that important. Forget it. Anyway, there are many ways for him to become stronger now. Getting stronger by basking in the sun is indeed Xiao's signature ability. But in fact, it is not that important to him. He will study it when he has the opportunity. For now, he will study what he can get his hands on first. Where's Logan? Aurora knew what he was going to do before he came, trade Logan back. She didn't expect that the unruly Wolverine would be caught. It seems like it was a long time ago when something like this happened. Only then did Shen Fei look away from Sunspot and look at Aurora. He didn't know why some people liked black people. Even if she wasn't that black, she was still black. Could it be that he just likes exotic customs? The professor told you, where are the things? Shen Fei did not speak, but looked at Aurora and said. The lineup dispatched this time is quite luxurious, including Iceman, Sunspot, Storm and Beast. Both combat power and intelligence are complete. The Beast next to him squinted his eyes, lifted the box in his hand, gave Shen Fei a look, and said, "We need to see Logan. Only after he is released can I give this to you." Good. Shen Fei motioned to Norman who was beside him to get Logan out. Norman left in a hurry, while Max was vigilant beside him because he noticed that the bioelectricity of these people was extremely powerful. Except for the blue-haired man in front of me. Shen Fei suddenly asked. Speaking of which, Mr. Beast, look at you. Could it be that you have given up on research on inhibitors? To be honest, he was quite interested in the X-gene inhibitor that Beast had created. This is completely a weapon against mutants, and if the specificity is reduced and the universality is increased, it will become a nightmare for most extraordinary people caused by physical mutations. Mr. Shen knows about my research. The Beast thought about what the professor had said to him before coming. Shen Fei is a person whose IQ is not weaker than him at all, and he also told him about Shen Fei's shocking theories. The Beast fell into doubt. If Shen Fei's theory was true, then the basis for his research was one-sided, since it was based on one-sided research. Needless to say, the results of the research are also one-sided. Of course I know, I once dug out your and the professor's research on the X gene. Although some of them have been sealed now, I used some means to get them out. Quote. Naturally, those information were obtained from Ross. Now one of the largest sellers of Osborne's self-healing bandages and rapid self-healing sprays is Ross, compared to Phoenix number 1. These two things can be popularized in the military on a large scale. Now there are people to ask for. Although Ross has a tough personality, he is also a politician and knows how to get the maximum benefit. If you're interested, we can chat when you have time. Your research is correct, but your direction is wrong. Quote. Shen Fei only briefly mentioned it. He quite appreciates scientific research talents and likes to talk to people with high IQs. When the beast wanted to ask further, Aurora stopped him. Now Shen Fei is the one who captured Logan. They would even trade their blood with the professor, if not for the professor himself. She will definitely not agree. The beast was a little disappointed, but he also knew that the overall situation was the most important thing. Shen Fei said with a smile, "We can chat on the email address then. My email address is on our company's official website." Ah, the beast was about to say yes when Aurora glared at him. Is now the time to say this? At this time, Norman walked in pushing an experimental bed. Logan was unconscious on the experimental bed, with 4 pairs of handcuffs cuffing his limbs, and a huge handcuff cuffing Logan's waist. Logan's face was weak, his lips were pale, and there were large and small white marks and faint white pinholes on his arms. "You guy, what on earth have you done?" Aurora growled when he saw Logan's miserable appearance. She once had a partial relationship with Logan, and she also had a partial understanding of Logan's abilities. This is obviously the sign of healing that occurs when a large number of wounds occur in a short period of time. Shen Fei looked at the beast and said, "Logan is here, it's time for you to show me the deal." The beast looked at Aurora, who was leading this time. Aurora gritted her teeth secretly and stared at Shen Fei. She wished that a storm would pass and smash Shen Fei into pieces, but she thought of what the professor said to her. Now mutants have been forced to the point where they can barely show up in society. If Shen Fei can prove his theory, then the status of mutants will change. Show him. The beast opened the box and found 4 bottles of blood inside, with labels indicating whose blood it was. "Okay, I believe in the professor's character, and Logan will give it back to you." Shen Fei tapped the button on the experimental bed. Kaka. All the handcuffs were released. In an instant, Logan, whose eyes were still closed, opened his eyes and growled, "Die. You cold-blooded devil." In an instant, 3 rays of cold light suddenly shot out from between the fingers of his left and right hands, penetrating fiercely towards Shen Fei's body. But Shen Fei took 2 steps back without warning, just in time to avoid Logan's claws. When the thumb of his right hand touched the ring on his index finger, he felt the demonic power that instantly filled his body, instantly increasing his strength. He stepped forward and kicked up a fierce current of air. His footsteps shook the entire office, and he rushed out like a beast. The terrifying power suddenly seemed to explode the air, making a sound of air explosion. With the help of super senses and super reactions, before Logan could even react, Shen Fei's fist hit Logan's body in an instant. Boom. Single quote. A huge crash instantly echoed throughout the office. PFF'd. Single quote. Logan's body was suddenly bent around the waist by the terrifying force, and then the huge force drove Logan's body madly into the air. The air that was usually invisible and intangible turned out to be as violent as a physical existence, preventing Logan from rushing forward, and the sound of dong 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 exploded crazily. Shet. Logan. Everyone was stunned by the movement that happened at this moment, and at this time, Logan had smashed Norman's desk instantly, and even the remaining force was not reduced. Bang. Single quote. Kara. Single quote. Even the bulletproof glass on the outer wall was shattered by Logan's body, and the glass turned into fragments and flew around. The whole person fell towards the outside of the building. Logan. Aurora shouted, rushed out, jumped forward, and jumped down. The outer wall kept rushing in with strong winds, and soon Aurora ran in through the hole with Logan in his arms. While holding Logan, Aurora noticed that all the muscles in Logan's body had turned into flesh and were limp. But not long after, Logan's body returned to normal. After landing, he stared at Shen Fei with his eyes and said coldly, "You devil. Don't let me find a chance in the future, I will definitely kill you." Shen Fei closed the demon ring, and the gushing power returned to Shen Fei's body. After hearing Logan's threat, he said with a smile, "I just need a guinea pig, if you are still caught by then." It depends on whether your beloved professor will save you. Quote. Iceman, Sunspot and Beast all came to Aurora and stared at Shen Fei warily. Waves of cold air filled the air around Iceman Bobby, the sunspots all over became pitch black, and heat waves rolled around him. Aurora floated in the air, her eyes suddenly covered in white, and strong winds rolled up invisible around her. And Max's whole body exudes wisps of lightning like electric snakes. As long as Shen Fei gives the order, he will take action immediately. Norman next to him also stared at Aurora and others, and pressed a button. Dang 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 dang. There was a sound of helicopters spiraling, and the bulletproof glass was broken. The machine guns on the 4 helicopters were aimed at Aurora and others. Think clearly, do we really want to start a fight? At least the beast will definitely die here. Shen Fei's hair and clothes were swaying in the strong wind, staring at Aurora floating in the air. Aurora stared at Shen Fei, and Charles's gentle voice sounded in his mind, Aurora, bring them back. There should be no conflict with Shen Fei now. But Professor, I said, our enemy now is not Shen Fei. Charles's voice took on a stern tone. Aurora stopped his ability, the pupils in his eyes came out again, his body gradually fell to the ground, and he stared at Shen Fei reluctantly, let's go. If what Charles said is true, it would be best not to antagonize other forces now. This is good. The grinning beast heard Aurora's words and nodded. Iceman and Sunblack had no choice but to stop. They thought they could still fight this time. Logan seemed to have been warned by Charles, but he just stared at Shen Fei angrily and followed Aurora away. Shen Fei looked at the backs of the 5 people leaving and didn't know what he was thinking. After Aurora and the others left, Norman asked, Boss, aren't you going to keep them all? I've got the undead army on standby. Quote. Norman didn't know what had happened to the mutants. In his opinion, as long as there were more people, they could all be taken down. They can't be taken, and besides Logan, they are not our enemies. Shen Fei took a deep breath, and the sense of urgency in his heart rose again, although he could now burst out with extremely powerful power in an instant. But compared to something as solid as storm, if a very strong tornado breaks out, it can even destroy the entire Auburn building. It's still not strong enough. Single quote. Shen Fei murmured in his heart that he knew that if he had attacked Logan, the X-Men and the others would definitely come looking for him, but the self-healing ability was something he must obtain. Even though this may not be as helpful to his strength and physique as Jessica. But in this dangerous world, ensuring that you don't die is the key. Shen Fei looked at the suitcase in Norman's hand and only needed to analyze the power of the 4 of them. Iceman plus Storm combined their lung cells to form super breathing. The Cyclops gene is integrated into his own eye genes. As for Charles's cells, he needs to use them to guard against some power that controls the mind in the future. Even if these 4 abilities can only be analyzed to produce weakened versions, they can allow him to rise to a higher level again. At this time, in Hell's Kitchen, Kingpin was receiving a person, an old-looking woman. Mr. Kingpin, we have lost something these days, please help me find it. The sitting woman asked with a smile. Behind her were 2 short Asian faces wearing white robes. A pair of eyes looked at Kingpin warily. Can't help. Bullseye stood behind Kingpin, staring at the woman as if he was sizing up how to kill the woman with one blow. But I have already signed an agreement for something like that. You are responsible for delivering it to me. Mrs. Gao said lightly. Jin Zhang clicked the cigar in his hand on the ashtray and said with a smile, I have helped you transport it here, do you know how much effort it took me? I have handed this thing into the hands of your hand, and our agreement is complete. As for being robbed, that has nothing to do with me. Quote. Kingpin thought about what his people reported. Many people died next to the house he lent to the hand, all of them ninjas from the hand. Moreover, after forensic identification, these corpses were smashed directly from the outside by brute force. Even his own strength cannot reach this level. The murderer is a completely inhuman force. Thinking of Shen Fei, the person he had traded with before, he knew that it must be Shen Fei and the others who were responsible, but who? Could it be Shen Fei? Hell's Kitchen is your place, and my stuff was lost in your place. As an ally, you should have this responsibility. Otherwise, our hand may have to reconsider our cooperation with you. Quote. Mrs. Gao said lightly. That's what Alexandra said too. Mrs. Gao nodded, her voice full of determination. Well, because this thing is very important to the 5 of us, remember. There are 5 of us. Black sky is one thing, they also lost the keel. Once the black sky is gone, we can continue to recreate it, but it will only cost a little more time and money. If they wanted to have children, there would be plenty of them. But the keel is related to their lifespan, and they must extract the power from the keel to extend their lifespan. Without their lifespan, their power, money, and strength are gone. And they don't even know who robbed it, and it's so powerful that even Black Sky can't deal with that person. Even if the beast has just merged with Black Sky, it is not something that ordinary superheroes can deal with. Forced to do anything, they even ignored the covenant with Jin Bin and came directly to threaten him. She naturally knew that after this incident, their original relationship would be cracked, but she had no choice. The keel is too important to them. Jin Bin looked at Mrs. Gao's serious expression and narrowed his eyes slightly. What exactly did Shen Fei take away from them that made the entire hand so nervous? After thinking for a while, he said, Shen Fei. Shen Fei. When Mrs. Gao heard the name, she frowned and couldn't help but ask again. Superman. A few days later. At night, Osborne Tower is still brightly lit. Shen Fei rubbed the center of his brows, observing and studying these days. Finally, he was able to analyze all the genes he obtained from Charles, but because there was only blood, some fragments were still missing. But it's enough, he just needs to get some of his abilities first. To analyze the complete fragment, they must cooperate with the research. The X genes of Cyclops and Storm are relatively simple, while the genes of Charles and Iceman are at least dozens of times more complex than them, and there are even hundreds more genetic targets. Shen Fei began to operate continuously in front of the computer screen, directly following the formula he got from Richard, and genetically cut the extraordinary spider. Because Charles's genes involve changes in the brain, Shen Fei planned to put it last. As for Iceman and Storm's genes, he planned to limit them to his lungs, and he needed to find a way to fit them into his lung cells. Although the ice elementalization and Storm's power of almost controlling the weather are very cool. But the abilities will be complex and numerous. Even if the powers in his body do not conflict, it will make it impossible for Shen Fei to fully cooperate with these powers. Otherwise, he could just ask for Max's abilities. The way to release the laser eye ability is through his eyes, so Shen Fei planned to directly cut the gene and inject it into his body. So Shen Fei planned to deal with the Cyclops gene first. Change adenine at fixed point 1 to guanine and thymine to cytosine. The structure of fixed point 2 is twisted by 32 degrees, and its 3 groups of purines are removed. Bend the structure directly 180 degrees at fixed point 3. Shen Fei continued to modify the genes of the extraordinary spider, and his eyes continued to be modified according to the genes of the Cyclops. His brain was spinning crazily, and he was mumbling to himself, constantly coming up with plans. And at certain times, you have to frantically calculate the data that needs to be changed, and simulate in your mind the effects that will occur every time the genetic scissors are used. Because genes are said to be scissors, but they do not mean to cut directly like scissors on a macro scale. Instead, the enzyme in the virus acts on the gene to carry out targeted mutation and cleavage of the purine or pyrimidine at the designated site. Therefore, to simulate its effects, one must have a thorough understanding of the original genes, mutated genes, and various chemical reactions. Not to mention that Shen Fei was not calculating one fixed point, but all the fixed points in the entire gene chain. If he calculated it on a computer, the GPU would probably be burned out. But Shen Fei's mind was calculating the various reactions all the time. When one of the steps was just completed, the next step was already in his mind. At the back, the speed of Shen Fei's fingers was so fast that phantoms appeared, which was dizzying. If the keyboard hadn't been a relatively reliable one, Shen Fei would have broken it long ago. With the last genetic scissors sent into the body of the extraordinary spider. Under Shen Fei's microscope, the extraordinary spider gene that had been cut according to the Cyclops gene had completely changed. It was even said that it had now become the Cyclops gene. But because most of the spider's original genes have been affected, the specific proteins now displayed in the spider's body have completely changed. Even normal physiological functions cannot be maintained. The extraordinary spider began to let out a piercing scream, and even began to tremble all over, twisting its body crazily in the experimental box. This was the first time he directly used extraordinary spiders to embed other genes. Watching the extraordinary spider in the experimental box suddenly fall down, only an exoskeleton was left to support it, while the soft tissue in the body turned into thick slurry. Shen Fei used a needle to extract the thick slurry inside and began to filter it. You end up with a bottle of crisp green reagent. Shen Fei dropped a drop of reagent, used a radio-electron microscope to find all the genetic data, and then put it into the computer for comparison. Green data kept appearing on the screen, and Shen Fei was watching quietly. He is not worried about failure at all, because in his concept, as long as he wants to understand anything, the result is only 0 and 1. When he calculated all the data, the result was already confirmed. Under the moonlight, one after another figures appeared around Osborne Company. They were all wearing black ninja uniforms and were short in stature. The leading hand ninja muttered a lot, and the others said, "Hey." Started to scatter. Looking for an opportunity to sneak into the Osborne building, they had two purposes this time. One was to rescue the leader Heikong, and the other was to find the dragon bones and bring them back to the five elders. The leader looked at the stone in his hand, which was the evidence of finding the dragon bone. The closer to the keel, the brighter the stone will be. But their first task is to sneak into Osborne Tower. And you can't alert Superman, the same guy who casually overturned a jeep. Followed by dark shadows sneaking into Osborne Company. At this time, Shen Fei, who was still looking at the data in the laboratory, frowned and said, "Is someone coming to the door again?" Single quote. The sound of his breathing was very soft, if it weren't for the fact that he practiced the secret method of the Holy Society, which further developed his hearing, and the spider sense gave him an extremely sensitive feeling. He's really hard to find. However, the model he constructed in his mind was still relatively vague. The only ninjas from the hand who could reach this point were the only ones who could reach this level. He had not yet found the secret method of the hand. The ninja he captured has been tortured for 4 days and still hasn't let go. It seems that he can get more samples this time. He doesn't believe that everyone is such a hard nut. "Max, someone is coming. Bring the undead army and the infrared detector." Shen Fei took out his phone and called Max. "I know, boss." A blue light suddenly shot up from the Osborne Company, and a man in a sweatshirt floated in the air. Now he could use the friction of lightning to generate a magnetic force on the soles of his feet that partially offset gravity. Although it is only the preliminary application of electromagnetism, it also means that Max has begun to enter this stage. Sometimes, hard work is really useless in the face of talent. Some scientists also use iron to judge the effect of electromagnetism. But in Max, he can directly see any current and the magnetic field lines generated by the current. It just means that he can only control the current, not the magnetic field lines. However, according to the plan Shen Fei made for him, it has already been put into preliminary use. He likes the feeling of being valued by Shen Fei. He knows that what is useful to Shen Fei is the ability that he accidentally obtained, but Shen Fei does not regard him as a monster, but as a kindred spirit. Gave him respect, a job, and a life. Anyone who dares to offend Shen Fei will be his enemy. A series of strong figures rushed out from Osborne. These were all people injected with Phoenix number 2. Even if Phoenix 3 can be produced now, all of them may have to be replaced. It is impossible to announce the effects of Phoenix 3, and the cost is very high, and mass production will only result in losses. If it is not the ultimate perfection, Phoenix 2 is actually enough. As for Rose, Shen Fei planned to get a defective version of Phoenix number 3 for Rose. Because the self-healing ability of the full version is too abnormal, even if he tested it on different people, the suitability for the fused X gene was actually different. He has the spirit of evolution, and his fusion abilities can reach a perfect level. For example, Connors has been injected with lizard serum. With the combination of the two, his self-healing ability is actually higher than that of Norman and Harry. And Harry is younger and taller than Norman and Crow. But no matter what, they are much stronger than number 1 and No. 2. However, the Undead Legion is just a first-time product, and it is impossible to use Phoenix 3 to create an Undead Legion. Facing these ninjas, the effect of Phoenix 2 is enough. Max wears special glasses. In his sight, a human-shaped bioelectricity is in front of his eyes, and then the eyes collect the image formed on his retina. Then it is transmitted back to Osborn's central system and transmitted to the glasses of the undead army. No matter how powerful the secret method of the hand is, it only weakens the sound of heartbeat and breathing. As long as you are alive, there is bioelectricity, and Max can see it. What's going on? How can they see us? The leading ninja suddenly saw figures rushing towards them. They had used secret techniques to avoid them as much as possible, but these figures seemed to be able to see them. Rushed towards them with great purpose. They formed a team of 3 or 3 and instantly engaged one of the ninjas. Bang 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 bang. These ninjas thought that these people would immediately fight with them with cold weapons, so they instantly drew out a series of cold rays, and the sharp Japanese long swords immediately rushed towards them. Unexpectedly, he pulled out his pistol in an instant, as if he had rehearsed this action many times. Start shooting wildly at the target in front of you. In an instant, gunfire continued and fire flew. American II. Confrontation. Japanese style II. Single quote. Dang dang dang. Single quote. Bullets and blades collided wildly, and at the same time, the ninja continued to charge forward, approaching the person in front of him in an instant. The leader of the ninja, Gokawa Kamito, also rushed towards the leader Andy. Crow's subordinate, Andy, was also the first person to sign up for the Immortal Plan. Because he has cancer, if he does not sign up for this plan, the only outcome waiting for him is death. But it worked. His cancer was suppressed, and because of the apoptotic effect of self-healing factors on cells, his cancer cells even self-apoptotic. He even mastered superhero-like abilities. Let him know that the enemies of Osborn Company will be his enemies in the future. Andy kept pulling the trigger in his hand, and fire spurted out from the muzzle of the gun, aiming at Gokawa-sama's vitals. Gokawa-sama did not panic at all in the face of a weapon that could take the lives of ordinary people at any time. The knife in his hand kept swinging out, deflecting all the bullets fired at him. This is difficult for ordinary swordsmen to do, but for the ninjas of the opponent association, using cold weapons to deal with hot weapons is one of their daily trainings. Especially the pistol that almost everyone has in hand. After all, not everyone has an automatic rifle. In an instant, with the sound of dang, 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 screams. This gave him the feeling of being in control of other people's lives and deaths. Controlling the life and death of others is the highest power. He raised the knife and lowered it. The blade of the knife passed across Andy's throat. Feeling the touch from the handle of the knife, Gokawa was about to rush towards the other person without looking back. As far as he was concerned, Andy was dead. He didn't know why such a weak person could be the leader. When he first came, the lady told him to be careful, because there was no way these people could cause harm to them. But the next moment, where do you want to go? A big hand suddenly grabbed him, and an extremely cold voice sounded behind him. Gokawa turned around suddenly and found Andy, who was supposed to have his throat cut to death just now. At this time, he stared at him as if nothing was wrong, and fired wildly at his back with the pistol in his hand. Bang 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 bang. Single quote. The blood hole kept splattering with blood. Even though Gokawa was a ninja, his body had been trained to the limit that ordinary people could exercise, but he continued to shoot like this. They had no ability to heal themselves, and the organs in their bodies were penetrated one after another. Before Gokawa was about to die, he couldn't help but ask, "Why didn't you die?" "You guess." Andy smiled slightly and touched his neck. If he hadn't experienced it personally, it would be hard for him to imagine that he could actually obtain such an ability. When Gokawa heard Andy's answer, before he could say, "You," in his mouth, his eyes went dark and he fell to the ground. Capture the rest as much as possible. This is Dr. Shen's order. Yes, Shen Fei was not worried at all about the war on the plains outside Osborn Company. He had just been injected with the Cyclops gene and was already beginning to feel his eyes burning. At this time, a figure walked in, with a bald head and a target above his head. Bullseye. So the Kingpin and the Hand are cooperating. It was Bullseye who walked in. Dr. Shen, I am a mercenary. Since the Hand will give you money, I will naturally come. Just be obedient and hand over what you got from the Hand. Quote. Boss. A strong man stopped us. He looked like he had a hard shell all over his body. Even guns couldn't penetrate it. At this time, there was a sound in the laboratory, and Shen Fei looked at the camera. Rhinoceros man. You are all in a group, right? Shen Fei didn't expect that the Hand would also invite the rhinoceros. Isn't the rhinoceros not dead yet? Aha! At this time, a dart flashed by, and Shen Fei tilted his head slightly. The dart passed by his ear, and even hit his ear, making a bang sound. Bullseye looked at Shen Fei in surprise. You actually dodged my dart. Since he became a killer, no one can dodge his darts and can only resist. Even Daredevil has been shot by him countless times. Look into my eyes. At this time, Shen Fei suddenly said. Bullseye couldn't help but look over, and found that Shen Fei's eyes had become extremely red. In an instant, 2 beams of red light spurted out from Shen Fei's eyes like 2 beams of light. Super laser eyes. Bullseye has never seen anyone shoot lasers out of their eyes. He already wanted to hide. With his intuition as a killer and mercenary for so many years, Shen Fei actually sensed a crisis when his eyes turned red. But his body couldn't keep up with his instincts. And he thought that Shen Fei would fall into a violent state and rushed towards him. Who would have thought that his eyes would spray laser light? Boom. Single quote. Intense high temperature fell on Bullseye in an instant. The laser penetrated his muscle tissue, and even his bones were unable to stop the high temperature. Bullseye doesn't even feel anything, because his burnt wound was sutured by an extremely high temperature laser in the next moment. And at the same time, Bullseye's body seemed to have been hit hard, and he flew upside down and hit the wall of the laboratory with a bang, and even made a dent. Shen Fei moved his neck, and the laser instantly burned Bullseye's neck and cut it open. The head, which still had a shocked expression, fell to the ground, but no blood came out at all. Because the high temperature of the laser glues all the wounds together. Jin Bing's trump card died directly in Shen Fei's hands at this moment. Not bad, but for example, Dakao's laser eyes are a little different. Shen Fei's Cyclops not only has intense high temperatures, but also has kinetic energy impact. However, Dakao's laser eye can spray from the ground to the sky, but Shen Fei estimated that he could spray at hundreds of meters before the condensed beam would disperse. But this gives me more energy attacks. Shen Fei murmured, and he felt that Cyclops' ability was not that simple. He discovered that he could also control the light point to rotate and explode, turn, etc., but this may require him to develop control. Almost unlimited energy. It seems that Cyclops has great potential, but there are too many people in the X-Men who are against the sky, so he is not so eye-catching. Shen Fei's eyes had dimmed. He didn't need glasses to control the power like Cyclops. Because Cyclops was mentally damaged when he was a child that he couldn't control it, but Shen Fei was not damaged, so he could control it easily. Shen Fei took some things from the laboratory, floated up, and flew out of the laboratory in an instant. Hey, big guy, long time no see, you actually came to Osborne Company to cause trouble today. A red figure kept jumping around the square, dodging the impact of a strong man with gray skin who had a pair of rhinoceros horns on his head. Peter easily dodged the collision of the rhinoceros man with a boom sound. The entire wall was knocked down. Norman and Connors hid in the distance and watched Peter dealing with the rhino man. Keep it down, he can hear it. Connors reminded that Peter is still being kept in the dark. Tell Norman to watch what he says. Norman frowned. This rhinoceros is quite powerful. It can break this wall easily. After the battle, I'm afraid it will cost a lot to repair. Just wait for the compensation given to him in advance. I know this rhinoceros man, he has been in the news. There was even a low-rise house that was directly knocked down by him. If he were allowed to run, his strength should reach nearly 70 tons. Quote. 70 t. Norman looked at the rhinoceros man in surprise. Such a rare individual boss would definitely want to capture it and study it. The most terrifying thing about this rhinoceros man is that when he collides, this restricted terrain greatly weakens his ability. The spider silk in Peter's wrist kept spitting out, constantly shifting positions in this narrow terrain. This terrain was greatly weakening the rhinoceros, but for Peter, it is greatly enhanced. With spider silk and spider sense, it was impossible for him to be caught by this rhinoceros who could only go straight. "You fool, if you can, fight me head on," Alexei growled. Since he got this power and indestructible skin, he has never been played by others, even if he was once unattainable. When begging him to take action, you must be humble. But it's been twice, this guy has teased him twice. Including this time, 3 times in total. With his simple mind, he has completely forgotten the mission for which the hand hired him. He wanted to catch this bug right now, crush it with enough force that he could knock down a house, crush it until blood spurted all over his body, and listen to him scream in pain and beg for mercy. Peter smiled and said, "Come on, big rhinoceros. How come you haven't made any progress after being beaten so many times?" But I was still a little worried. Fortunately, the passage inside the company couldn't support the big rhinoceros, otherwise, even he would have no choice but to hide. Adrift, Peter pressed against the wall, overlooking Alexei. "Die to me." Alexei's whole body moved forward and hit the wall where Peter was. Boom. Single quote. The entire wall collapsed and he rushed into a house. Peter was planning to continue consuming the body of the big rhinoceros and then lead it to the bottom of the company. He once heard someone say that there was an extraordinary electric eel that could supply electricity to the entire company. If this big rhinoceros is brought in, it will definitely be stunned directly. Just when Peter was about to implement his plan, he pressed the spider silk launcher, but nothing was sprayed out. He was almost late today and actually forgot to inject spider silk into the spider silk launcher. When Peter saw Alexei rushing towards him again, he jumped suddenly and jumped over Alexei's head. The spider silk in his other hand kept spitting out, trying to stick Alexei with it. But Alexei on the run has great power. The spider thread that could almost stick to the high-speed train was torn off in an instant. Gift crab. Peter rolled over suddenly, dodging Alexei's impact again. "Have you beaten enough?" At this time, an extremely cold voice sounded, and the next moment. Boom. Single quote. A swift figure suddenly collided with Alexei, who was in shock. It was as if 2 wild beasts met in the wilderness and collided in an instant. The terrifying force collided, exploding in all directions at the center of the collision between the two, sweeping up the surrounding debris. The 2 figures were stagnant in place, wrestling with each other. "Don't do it yet," Shen Fei growled. He didn't expect Rhino Man, who was always being teased by Spider-Man in the Spider-Man series, would have such strength. Spider-Man can defeat him every time, which really feels like the halo of the protagonist. "Xiete, the boss is actually so strong." Single quote. Peter's face under the mask was full of shock, and he shouted in his heart. "Is this the strength of Superman?" After hearing Shen Fei's words the next second, Peter reacted from the shock. The remaining spider silk kept spitting towards Alexei's legs, and the milky white spider silk fell on Alexei's feet. When the special spider silk comes into contact with the air, the terrifying adhesion produced sticks Alexei in place. Alexei wanted to struggle, because he couldn't attack. The spider silk stuck to his feet, and he couldn't pull it out even with all his strength. The center of gravity is out of balance. Like a huge rhinoceros that had been shot by a poacher, Alexei fell to the ground with a bang, shaking up the debris and rocks around him. "Let me go," Alexei growled. "It's all over the place, big guy." Peter laughed. "Go to jail." "What kind of jail are you going to?" "This is the criminal who invaded my company. I will take him away." Nails flew out of Shen Fei's hands instantly. "Kakaka, my skin is indestructible. What do you want to do to me?" Alexei laughed as he watched Shen Fei throw something at him. But he found that the nails that fell on his body actually had the power of direct penetration, making him feel pain that he had never experienced since getting this indestructible skin. Shen Fei had already prepared micro-syringes made of vibranium for this kind of enemy with extremely high surface defense. But only the needle that penetrated was vibranium, and the rest was still normal metal. The ether, which was almost 100% pure, was injected into Alexei's body in an instant. Even though his endurance was extremely strong, with this concentration of ether, Alexei soon found that the Shenfei in front of him had turned into 2, 3 or even many. Peter saw the fallen Alexei, stretched out his hand and wanted to speak. But I don't know what to say. The man in front of him was his boss, and he was someone who admired him very much. And the boss is right, this is the person who invaded Osborne Company, and it should be left to him to deal with it. But Peter was caught in a tangle. Shenfei looked at Peter and said, "Spider-Man, do you think what I said is wrong? They are obviously here for our company's trade secrets. Now I'm overpowered. It's normal to leave it to me." Quote. After seeing the spider totem, he gained the ability of Spider-Man, which means that Peter's abilities were also given by the spider totem, and often many spiders in the universe are Peter Parker. This is a bit like a protagonist template. So before Shenfei fully understood the spider totem, he had no intention of competing with Spider-Man. He didn't want to touch this kind of thing with a big boss behind it. The big guys he's talking about are those who can involve the multiverse. For example, Vishanti is behind the Sorcerer Supreme, Spider Totem is behind Spider-Man, Sithorn is behind Scarlet Witch, etc. Unless it is really unavoidable, or Shenfei has the ability to avoid it. Peter flinched a little when he heard Shenfei's words and looked at Shenfei's eyes on him. Or do you want to compete with me for this trophy? Spider-Man, look at the extent of the damage you caused when you fought with him. Do you know how much it will cost to fix this? Quote. Peter couldn't help but look around. Several offices were in a mess. Big holes were knocked out of the surrounding walls, and the steel bars came out. Fortunately, Peter was still rational, or it was a subconscious action caused by his spider sense. He has never climbed onto the load-bearing column, otherwise Spider-Man might still be alive if the load-bearing column was broken. But the employees in this building who are still working overtime will not survive. Peter's face looked a little embarrassed. It was not that he had never encountered this kind of situation, but usually someone would pay for the damage caused by fighting around him. Either the person he saved or the police station. But this is someone else's company. It is regarded as private property, and since he only happened upon it by chance rather than acting bravely, the local government may not necessarily reimburse him. As for saving, looking at the situation just now, his boss actually didn't need him to save him. I think I have reduced the losses for your company. Cut your losses. Shenfei shook his head and said, "If I were you, I would leave now. Otherwise, if you let me know who you are, just wait for my court summons. Before I change my mind." Quote. Ahem. Single quote. Peter coughed twice, his voice a little louder to avoid being recognized. "Then I'll leave first." After Peter finished speaking, he took a running start and jumped out directly towards one of the office windows. Ah! A scream suddenly sounded. "Can't you go through the main entrance? If you don't have a spider thread, why don't you jump down?" Shenfei shook his head and looked at Connors and Norman who were walking over. "Send this big guy to the laboratory, don't inject Phoenix number 1. All the muscles that exerted his strength were broken. Quote. "New. Ask Max if it's done." "Boss, it's done. The harvest is pretty good, 7 died, and there are still 15. At this time, a bolt of electricity flew in from the outside, and Max's figure appeared and spoke. "Yes, well done. Let's go to the finance office to collect the bonus." "I don't want a bonus, I am the captain of the company's Guardian Alliance, and it is my responsibility to protect Osborne. You should not be rewarded for completing your responsibilities." Quote. Max said seriously. "Okay, then go back and rest. You are tired in the middle of the night. How is your mother recently?" "My body is quite healthy, and my temper has improved a lot recently," Max said with a smile. "That's good." When Shenfei heard that Max didn't need the bonus, it meant that he had already partially returned to his heart. This is a good result. He doesn't like to deal with those superheroes, because their weaknesses are sometimes covered by impulse, which is what they call sense of justice. This is uncontrollable. People like Max are the easiest to control. He has no sense of justice. As long as you control his weaknesses, you can control him perfectly. After dealing with these matters, the 4 of them left separately. It was only after tonight that Shenfei remembered that he seemed to have something that he had not dealt with, and that was the section of keel bone found in Haikong's hand. He always felt that this thing might be the breakthrough point for him to master the energy of longevity. After all, the energy of longevity is the power of the dragon. And that part was the keel. Shen Fei rubbed his brows on the way. He had a lot to study. But no matter how good his brain is, he can only study it one series at a time. Where can I find more talent? Single quote. An idea popped into Shen Fei's mind. He needed more talents to help him complete his research. Dr. Octopus, Beast, King of Power, and Doom are all people with extremely high IQs in Marvel. Dr. Octopus, the Armor series. Single quote. It seems I have to find time to meet him. Shen Fei walked back to the laboratory, kicked Bullseye's head aside, pulled up Dr. Octopus's information, and thought to himself. Early the next morning, once again, Osborn and Company is making headlines. Because once again Osborn got bombed. This time Norman spoke out again, saying that superheroes have no effect at all in protecting citizens' property. They enjoy taxpayers' taxes, but have not achieved any results. They call on everyone to stop deifying superheroes. They are just people with abilities that are different from ordinary people. What on earth is Norman talking about? Do they need us to protect them? In a room, Barton watched Norman's criticism of superheroes on the news, and even his character couldn't help but sneer. With the strength of their boss, how could Osborn Company have any problems? Later, Norman even brought up the subject of the Heroes Act, which was currently causing a stir, and vaguely revealed it. Their boss, Superman, has already met with Iron Man. Expressing his agreement with Iron Man's ideas, he believes that Iron Man is the real superhero. Tony went to see Shen Fei. Falcon, who was carrying a backpack and wearing glasses, couldn't help but ask. Now it is obvious that the Avengers or superheroes are divided into two camps, the support camp headed by Iron Man and the liberal camp headed by Captain America. The former supports superheroes being regulated. The latter feels that if there is supervision, there will only be a group of police officers in the world instead of superheroes. At present, it seems that they can be caught and killed. But if Superman joins the Man of Steel, things will be unpredictable. Rogers nodded. We just need to be ourselves. But Barton, asked Nick. Do you know anything about the people who invaded Osborn Company? Let's see if we can win them over. Quote. Subconsciously he shook his hands and found that the shield was already in Shen Fei's hand. Tony told him that if he wanted to get his shield back, he could go to Shen Fei. But Tony won't help. And Tony seems to have caught some traces recently, and has found that there were blurry cameras on the road before his parents were killed. It's just that I haven't found where the camera belongs. Because it's been a long time. Many functions and lines have been changed, so it will take some time to find relevant information. During this period of time, Bucky must also be under Tony's supervision. Rogers couldn't take Bucky away. Tony said that if he planned to take Bucky away by force, he would not rule out using force to keep him. They leave now because they need to discuss countermeasures. Bucky's incident is just a microcosm of the big event of the Heroes Act. They took away the captain's shield. How about I go get the shield back? Suddenly, a ruffian-looking man next to him spoke. When the man saw the three people looking at him, he shrugged and said with a smile, Aren't I planning to help the captain get it back? I'm a professional on this matter. I can become bigger or smaller, of course, I'm not talking about my brother. Quote. Scott, I know you are doing it for my own good, but Shen Fei is a difficult person to deal with. Rogers shook his head. Scott was someone he had managed to recruit and was one of the secret weapons he used against Tony. If he is caught by Shen Fei, he will have one less effective fighting force when facing Tony. Don't worry, I'm a professional. I'm Ant-Man. Quote. Scott said confidently, it can be said that at least when it comes to stealing, no one is his opponent. This was the case before getting the Ant-Man suit, and it was even more like this after getting the Ant-Man suit. In the Osborn laboratory, Shen Fei was talking to a bearded man in front of him. The bearded man was a little surprised to hear Shen Fei's answer to the question, which was about nerve conduction and exoskeleton extension. Dr. Shen, I thought you were only an expert in biology. I didn't expect you to have so much research on engineering and atomic physics. Otto couldn't help but admire, and he found that what Shen Fei was talking about was exactly the direction in which he was confused now. He hurried over after receiving Shen Fei's email, knowing that Shen Fei was now his big benefactor. It's just that he was thinking that Shen Fei was still researching the direction of his research. What you want is nothing more than an extremely fine mechanical tentacle arm. The most critical thing is the reaction of the mechanical tentacle to your nerves. The response of the human body is about 0.2 approximately 0.3 seconds. You need more sophisticated microsensors and responders. Shen Fei motioned to Connors next to him to take out the things he had prepared, which were all Chidori's research on exoskeletons and Shen Fei's own data from when he was studying Crow. I've tried research on this type of thing. I believe Dr. Otto also has his own opinion. This is considered my experimental data and experimental methods. Dr. Otto, if you are interested, you can take a look. Quote. Otto couldn't help but take it and started to read it eagerly. Shen Fei was not in a hurry and looked at Otto with a smile. Otto was a super genius. He has been the best since he was a child, so he doesn't look down on things like assistants at all. This kind of genius-only theory makes him like to associate with geniuses, and he also thinks highly of Peter. Genius theory was his original intention in designing the mechanical tentacles, and after he designed the mechanical tentacles, he doesn't need an assistant anymore. All experiments rely entirely on himself, the 4 tentacles behind him, and the artificial intelligence inside. He believed in machines more than people, which paved the way for him to become Dr. Octopus. At least in the Marvel world, there is no good artificial intelligence thing. However, this kind of super genius has a common character, that is, if someone more talented than him appears in front of him, he will be extremely convinced of this person. For example, at this time, Otto looked at the data inside with joy. He did not expect that the problem that had troubled him for so long would be solved here today. How about, as far as I know, Dr. Otto is researching some relatively expensive experiments. We at Osborne have always been very supportive of research, and Dr. Otto also felt the achievements of our group before. Do you want to work in our group? I plan to open a new department, Artificial Intelligence and Engineering. If Dr. Otto comes, the deputy director will be yours. Quote. Deputy head, Otto couldn't help but ask, is there anyone in the Osborne group who is more powerful than Shen Fei? Well, I'm the supervisor, Shen Fei said with a smile. Otto nodded. To be honest, he was heartbroken because he felt that he had found his direction here. With just these information, Shen Fei had already advanced his research on mechanical tentacles a lot. And he loved working with geniuses. Whether it's Shen Fei or Connors. Can you really provide me with funds? Otto finally asked. His atomic energy experiments cost a lot of money. Shen Fei smiled and said, of course. To be honest, he is also interested in Otto's research. Of course, it is not the mechanical arm, but the research that can integrate the machine and the physical body and expand his nervous system. Now it seems that Otto has not reached that step yet. Okay, I'll join. The addition of Otto finally gave Osborne Company's Artificial Intelligence and Engineering Department an additional leader. Originally, this part should have been left to Crow. But because Crow has a more important task, which is to expand the relationship network of Osborne Company. For example, on the military side, Crow is at work. Therefore, this department has never been good or bad, but Shen Fei definitely wants to study the armor. The main reason is that warframes are easier to replicate than biological research. And the armor is better than nothing. Didn't you see that Spider-Man was wearing the suit at the end? As for Shen Fei, he is still studying the remaining 3 genes brought over by the X-Men. He found that although Charles's genes were complex, it was simpler for him to limit the abilities of Iceman and Storm to the lungs, for example. So he planned to add Charles's power to himself first. Otherwise, he would have to be on guard every time he saw Charles, and he didn't like this feeling. On the display screen, data are being calculated continuously. Modeling Charles's genes is much more difficult than that of his Cyclops, and Shen Fei also has to adapt it to the most suitable part of himself. How to integrate this part perfectly into your own genes. Shen Fei looked at the display screen that was still calculating, while he looked at a piece of spine in his hand. This is the dragon bone found in Haikong's house at that time. Some time ago, I put this aside because I was studying the power of demons and the energy of longevity. If the hand club hadn't come to his door a few days ago, he would have almost forgotten about it. Shen Fei asked someone to drag Haikong out, but Haikong just looked at Shen Fei coldly and said nothing. Let the beast come out and I'll ask him some questions. He said that if he doesn't come out, he will be drained of his power by you. Haikong's voice is relatively clear now, but if the beast controls Haikong, his voice will be rough. Whether he comes out or not, his power will be drained, unless he doesn't want to maintain his consciousness. Shen Fei said lightly. After his research, Shen Fei already knew that this way of demons descending, especially the way of possession, often uses the power of demons to project onto the host. Carry out mutations on the material level, causing lesions in the cerebral cortex, or directional mutations. A new personality is born. As the power of the devil continues to erode, more and more areas will be affected, and the original master's personality will become weaker and weaker, until the personality is completely annihilated. All the brain cells of the past were eliminated, and the devil was born. The process of demonic possession is a bit like cultivating one. It just means that powerful demons corrode very quickly, while weaker demons corrode more slowly. Could it be that you have figured it out and plan to let me possess you? At this time, Haikong's voice began to change, and his pure black eyes stared at Shen Fei. How to use this dragon bone? Dragon bone. I don't know how to use it. This is what those 5 people use to extend their lives. They and I have always been on our own terms. They long for my power, and I hope I can come here. We are more of a cooperative relationship. So it's normal that there are some secrets that I don't know. Quote. I understand, then you're useless. Forget it. Let's just keep knocking you out and use it as a way to extract the devil's power. When Shen Fei started to signal the assistant next to him to start preparing for the injection, the beast said hurriedly, this is nothing more than a special structure. I can feel that there is great energy in the bones. If you know a little bit about magic direction or methods like Iron Fist, you should be able to guide the power inside. Quote. Special structure. Single quote. Shen Fei asked someone to inject ether into the beast, and the beast growled, you are not trustworthy. I have already answered you. Whenever you hand over your occult knowledge, I will consider letting you go. Shen Fei said calmly, now the beast is considered a relatively important company asset. After all, his demon army still needs to extract demonic power from the beast. Don't even think about it. The worst case scenario is that you kill me and I return to hell. I will come back sooner or later. Ah, Shen Fei just sneered and stopped talking. He put the keel under the microscope for observation and study, and soon discovered that it was somewhat similar to human bone tissue. It's just that there is no yellow bone marrow, red bone marrow, or tight connective tissue in it. It is a milky white tissue that simultaneously serves as red bone marrow and yellow bone marrow. Shen Fei took the beta ray equipment and irradiated it, and soon discovered that the keel began to be filled with energy similar to the aura of longevity, and the fluorescence reactions were similar. The power of the dragon. This dragon bone contains the power of the dragon similar to the energy of longevity. But the dragon's power was completely locked by the dragon's bones. The surface structure of this keel acts as a strong magnetic field. Shen Fei suddenly had an idea. If his bones had this kind of structure, could he store the energy of longevity in his body? He definitely couldn't form a circuit similar to Iron Fist in his body, because that was also given to Iron Fist by Shou Lao. But what should I do? Meditation, bone tissue control. Shen Fei waited for each other to get the meditation method from the Holy Society. This method can make him fall into an ethereal state. The development of this meditation method on the body is a bit like I Shu and Si. If his mental power were stronger, could he use meditation and this dragon bone to conduct targeted excavation of his bone tissue? Maybe it would be better to have a transplant. Shen Fei suddenly had another idea. Why not transplant the dragon bone directly into his body? In this case, through meditation, the remaining bones in his body will be eroded by the dragon bone and turned into bones that can store the power of the dragon. When a child is born, he or she has 33 vertebrae, and by the time they reach adulthood, several of these bones will be glued together, reducing the number to 26. Shen Fei planned to transplant the keel bone to his own tailbone, which was once the most bony place, but because of the gluing of the baby's tailbone into adulthood, the nerve tissue and connective tissue in the middle have all apoptotic, and there will be free space. Connors, come in, huh? As soon as Shen Fei pressed the broadcast button directly connected to Connor's laboratory, he heard some subtle sounds, as if someone was mumbling or complaining about something. Super senses activated. A large amount of hearing, taste, and smell information continued to pour into Shen Fei's mind, and he began to construct scenes in his mind like building blocks. Next moment, the modeling of Osborne Tower and the surrounding scenery instantly appeared in Shen Fei's mind. Everything around is normal, but outside the Osborne building, there is a mechanical bird stranded in the sky. The key is that there is a little person on the mechanical bird. Scott, Shen Fei frowned. What was this guy doing at Osborne Company? If he remembered correctly, he should have joined Captain America's camp by now. You're not here to steal the shield, are you? He has analyzed the components of the shield, but there is an unknown element among the analyzed elements. There is currently no such element in nature. This means that this element is man-made. It is this element that changes adamantium alloy, giving it a more powerful defense than adamantium alloy. Because this element makes the vibranium atoms that are almost impossible to shift change more closely. He had memorized the properties of this element. So now Captain America's shield is more like a trophy to him. If Rogers can come up with something more valuable and trade with him, he is still willing to trade. But if you say you steal it back, that won't work. Max, there's a little bug outside, let's deal with it. If you can capture them alive, capture them alive. If you can't capture them alive, forget it. Quote. Shen Fei sent a message to Max. No matter how small Ant-Man is, unless he is already small enough to reach the quantum realm. Otherwise, his bioelectricity would still be visible. Max is his nemesis. Clear. Max nodded, as was his habit. If Shen Fei was still doing experiments, he would work overtime and wait for Shen Fei's instructions. Unless Shen Fei is not doing research, he will find time to go home. In the underground training room, Max hung up the phone after receiving the message and started taking the elevator to the first floor. Outside the Osborne building, a red mechanical bird was spinning and hovering around the building. Falcon is using the mechanical bird's X-rays to transmit the entire building, collecting all the images inside into the mechanical bird, looking for Captain America's shield. Falcon, can you find where Captain's shield is? Scott grabbed the slit of the mechanical bird and asked hurriedly through the headphones. Wait a minute, still looking. How about you just let me go in directly, and I'll look for it slowly. Scott, don't be impulsive. Osborne Company is dangerous. Roger's voice was full of helplessness, and he had no intention of letting Scott go to Osborne Company. Scott was stopped when he suggested it, but he later learned that Scott and Falcon had already taken action. Ha ha ha, I've been to more dangerous places. Not to mention Osborne Company. Scott said with a smile. At this time, Falcon suddenly said, someone is coming up underground and is getting ready to leave the door. Come up, come up. We are in heaven, he cannot see us. When I find a chance to rush into the building and find the shield, we'll leave. Quote. Falcon's voice suddenly sounded solemn, he's noticed. Suddenly, the Falcon in the distance noticed through the camera that the person coming out of the door raised his head, smiled at the mechanical bird, and moved his lips slightly. Bugs. Falcon yelled, Scott, look out. In an instant, lightning flashed, and a bolt of lightning hit the mechanical bird in the sky. Even a good bird player like Falcon couldn't react. Boom. Single quote. A ball of fire flashed in midair, and Scott yelled crazily in the air, help. When Rogers heard what Scott and Falcon said, he knew they had been discovered. Captain, I'm fine. Scott, who had shrunk in size, kept adjusting his size in the air, and a black figure appeared under his crotch. Hey, man. Thank you for your help. A flying ant becomes Scott's mount. At this moment, another bolt of lightning flashed, and the target was Scott. Scott knew now that the man who could discharge had used some means to see himself. The flying ants were instantly turned into cokes by the terrifying high temperature. And Scott's suit can isolate the high temperature and prevent Scott from turning into coke. But the belt around his waist suddenly flashed with sparks. Shet. A word flashed in Scott's mind, and the current penetrated his transformer. This was bad. Boom. Single quote. A huge red figure appeared in the sky, wearing a mask like an alien in a science fiction movie, and the suit was also full of science fiction. The giant-like figure slammed to the ground. He directly broke a tree, and the sharp tip of the tree was inserted into Scott's butt, causing him to scream. Scott kept tapping the reduction button on the transformation belt around his waist. Fortunately, it was night and there were few people around. Otherwise, if a person of that size appeared here, it would definitely cause a big commotion. And Max, who flew over, didn't expect such a thing to happen. Max was at a loss when he saw the sudden appearance of the giant. He had never encountered such an enemy before. At this time, a figure descended from the sky and landed next to him. It was Shen Fei, who noticed that Scott suddenly grew bigger. What a coincidence, the electromagnetic force caused by Max's lightning actually destroyed the belt by chance. This is also because the first generation Ant-Man suit is not yet perfect and prone to malfunctions. Hurry, God, don't play with me now. Single quote. Scott's prayer seemed to be effective, and his size began to shrink with a swish sound, turning into like a young child, spreading his legs and trying to escape. But he found that the back of his neck was grabbed and his body was lifted up. Scott touched his waist and took out a shrinker, but Shen Fei had already noticed his movement, grabbed him and threw him hard. The force was so strong that Scott almost vomited out everything he had for dinner. The micronizer in his hand was violently thrown out and landed on a big tree in the distance. The big tree instantly turned into a small tree, but the small tree still looked quite green. Scott, by the way, does Pym know that you stole his uniform? Also came to Osborne Company to commit theft. Quote, Shen Fei said calmly. Scott's heart trembled when he heard Shen Fei's words. He didn't say anything, just kept tapping the button on his waist. Buzz. Single quote. Shen Fei pressed the button in his hand. A sharp buzzer sounded instantly. Under the high-frequency electromagnetic pulse, Scott's belt instantly sparked and lost its effect. Brother, I can't change back. Just do it. Shen Fei walked back to the building as if he was carrying a naughty child. He turned to look at Max and said, Go take the mechanical bird back to the company and throw it to the engineering department for study. Got it, boss. Max looked at Scott in Shen Fei's hands and still felt magical. It's really amazing that someone can zoom in and out constantly. Returning to the laboratory, Shen Fei took off Scott's clothes and threw the miniature Scott into the cage. Brother, that's my thing. Now that I have it, it's mine. Shen Fei said with a smile. I didn't expect such a harvest. Chapter 91. The Ant-Man suit only has two components. One is the Ant-Man costume that becomes larger and smaller, and the other is the helmet used to control ants, which is the mask Scott wears. What Shen Fei is most concerned about is naturally the Pym particles that can be used to make them larger or smaller. There are many black technologies in the Marvel world, but these black technologies are completely black boxes. The principle is difficult to explain, but it can be achieved. Pym particles are one of them. It is a miniature atom that is used to reduce and enlarge the size of a target. The discoverer is Hank Pym, the founder of Pym technology. So it was named Pym particle. The plot of Ant-Man 1 inch should be over now, and the person in charge of Pym technology should be Pym's daughter, Hope. Hank and his daughter attach great importance to Pym particles and believe that if this thing is mastered by others, it will cause great harm to the world. Therefore, all information was blocked. Even if Shen Fei wanted to look for it, there would be no clues. Unexpectedly, Ant-Man himself came to the door. Soon Shen Fei found out the switch of the suit and took out a bottle of bright red stuff from his belt. This is Pym particle. Shen Fei took a look. He couldn't wait to study it, but he still suppressed his thoughts. Any research should be done step by step. At present, Pym particles have no significant effect on him. If he can get Sunspot or Xiao's ability, he will see if he can shrink a star and put it into his body. At that time, wouldn't it be equivalent to having a Superman with stellar energy? Let's transplant the keel first. At this time, Shen Fei's computer rang. Someone sent him an email. Shen Fei glanced at him and said, Rogers, are you anxious now? Return to him when you have time. Shen Fei now wanted to figure out how to transplant the keel bone into his tailbone, and was about to call Connors over to study it. Who knew that Scott, a living treasure, would lose his chain at a critical moment and his belt would suddenly malfunction? He prevented Max from knowing that he was hit by Pym particles and flew out directly. Connors, come here, I have a plan to discuss with you. Scott was caught. Rogers slammed the table and looked at the email he had sent, but there was no reply. Taking a deep breath, Scott became like this because of him, and he absolutely couldn't ignore it. I'm going to see Shen Fei and rescue Scott. I am coming too. I go. Barton and Falcon said at the same time, and Natasha, who came over later, shook her head and said, "If you go, it will only make things worse. There is only one person who can accompany the captain." Quote, "You mean to send out Wanda?" Falcon soon knew who Natasha was talking about, Wanda, the most powerful person on their side. Wanda's strength has no upper limit. If they can subdue Shen Fei now, there is only one person. Wanda. But Wanda now. Falcon was hesitant, and Wanda was still regretting the last time she captured Crossbones and used chaos magic to lure a bomb into the sky, causing a building to explode. Even in her opinion, the current split of the Avengers was caused by her. She hasn't been out for a while. Will there really be no problems if she and the captain go to Shen Fei's place now? Natasha just said, "This is Nick's judgment. Shen is not a person who does things unscrupulously. There is no good or evil in his heart. He only does things that are beneficial to him. He is an extremely calm egoist. If you want to communicate with him, you must have someone or something he is afraid of, and now we can achieve this level." Just Wanda. Quote, Rogers frowned, took a deep breath and said, "I'll ask Wanda. Scott was caught by Shen Fei because of me. I have to save him." In the laboratory, Connors, who rushed over, heard Shen Fei's plan and couldn't help but said, "Boss, there is only one copy of this keel. Are we really going to do transplants immediately without any scientific experiments?" Quote, he didn't know why Shen Fei suddenly wanted to do this transplant experiment. This is an accurate result without any repeated experiments at all. Just like this, he rashly transplanted an unknown dragon bone into his body, and he didn't know what the reaction would be. "Don't worry, I have calculated the best solution. This is the transplantation plan. Our current research on the power of the mysterious side has reached a bottleneck. This risky step is a must if this method is really going to work. From now on we will use the power of demons more efficiently." Quote, Shen Fei naturally did not rely on luck, but calculated it. As Connors watched, he explained, "When a baby grows, multiple tail bones will fuse to form one piece, and bone fusion is not a special case. Something similar happens to many mammals as they grow." Quote, "I understand, but those bones are all born by the individual, and they will not undergo any rejection reaction. But this is a foreign object. Logan was able to inject adamantium into all his bones. I just transplanted a keel. Self-healing physique will help me solve all this. Moreover, we have also conducted experiments and found that self-healing factors can resist rejection. And the surgical plan already includes my analysis of the keel structure and tissue. The structure inside it is honeycomb-shaped. It's almost the same as human bones, except that the more detailed structure presents a hexagonal honeycomb shape, which is extremely regular." Connors nodded. It turned out that Shen Fei had already done some research on the keel. Wait until Connors has read all the transplant plans. Shen Fei looked at Connors and said, "The leadership of this experiment will be given to you. I don't know how to take anesthesia. If you don't understand anything at the scene, you can ask me immediately. But it's you who's in charge. You need to completely wrap my bone nerves around this bone, and find the most appropriate position to fit my original tailbone." Connors nodded while listening. To be honest, the bone transplant surgery Shen Fei mentioned was actually not difficult. It was even simpler than the experiments he had done before. It's just that the recipient of the spell is Shen Fei, which makes it a little difficult for him to do it. Because he is afraid that he will fail. Okay, I will try my best. It's not about trying your best, it's about doing it. Connors, you are a genius in biology. In biology, as long as you want to do something, you will do it. Shen Fei said with a smile. Soon, Norman also found out about Shen Fei's surgery. He ran over quickly. The last time something like this happened was when Jessica was injected with potion. That was the first time that Shen Fei was sincerely convinced. There are actually such calm people in the world, who can even use themselves as experimental materials. He thought it was the last time. But now Shen Fei plans to use himself as an experimental material and transplant the keel directly. When Norman arrived, Shen Fei was already lying on the experimental table. Connors was wearing surgical clothes and looking at the surgical plan written down by Shen Fei himself. Here, then help. Norman took back all the words he wanted to persuade. He knew that Shen Fei would definitely not change the decision he had made. All he can do now is try his best to help. Heel transplantation, let's begin. Following Shen Fei's order, Connor's vibranium scalpel fell on Shen Fei's tailbone. Because flesh and blood will heal, he must continue to cut open the flesh and blood. This can cause severe pain. However, Shen Fei was still feeling Connor's movements calmly. He knew Connor's every move without even looking back. Go a little toward the left sacrum. The S3 nerve passes through the second hole in the keel. The S2 nerve bypasses the third hole in the keel, and at the same time, it quickly cuts through the periosteum of the second tailbone to align the keel. A little to the left. Shen Fei calmly corrected some of Connor's mistakes. Connor's was a little nervous at first, but he soon got better after listening to Shen Fei's command. Start transplanting this piece of keel in earnest. Norman watched clearly from the side. He felt that he could not match Connor's in terms of academic achievements because he was not in such a state. Once he fell into that kind of research state, it's the ultimate calmness. He has a lot to think about and cannot completely immerse himself in scientific research for a certain period of time. Norman had a lot of thoughts swirling in his mind, but he was still slow in his actions and completely placed himself in the role of assistant. Whenever Connors needed something, he would hand it over immediately. Anti-stimulant injection. Boss, please bear with me, I need to cut open the spinal cord. The most critical time to transplant this keel is to connect the nerves in the spinal cord to the keel. The spinal cord is the body's second brain and manages many nerve centers. Although Shen Fei's body has extremely strong self-healing ability, the tissue inside will not be destroyed at all. However, due to the excessive number of nerve endings, touching there will cause severe pain, and may even cause numbness all over the body, affecting the feeling of the lower limbs. If anesthesia is injected, Shen Fei will not feel the pain. But Shen Fei was performing the surgery directly without anesthesia, and the pain was no less than the death penalty in the Middle Ages. Shen Fei hummed. This kind of pain was far worse than when he was injected with the super soldier serum when he was still an ordinary person. That was the real feeling of being eaten alive. And it could be the super soldier serum that amplifies his control over calmness. The pain wasn't enough to make him lose control. Connors cut open Shen Fei's spinal cord and glued the connected nerves to the keel. In an instant these nerves spread, as if the strangler plant had found a banyan tree that had never been occupied by any strangler plant. Connors looked at this magical scene and kept silent. He just pressed Shen Fei's wounds together. The terrifying self-healing ability began to work, and the incision healed in an instant. No stitches even needed. In the end, only a trace of blood remained on Shen Fei's tailbone. It was as if nothing had ever happened. Connors breathed out and wiped his forehead. He was covered in cold sweat. Connors even felt that he was a little hypoglycemic. He had already done more complicated experiments. Shen Fei got up from the experimental table, and Norman handed over his clothes. You guys go back first and leave me here to feel it. To be honest, Shen Fei didn't feel anything was wrong. He even felt like he hadn't transplanted the keel. Norman can leave first if he has something to do. Just leave Connors here. Clear. Shen Fei sat cross-legged on the ground and began to adjust his breathing and meditate according to the secret method taught by the Holy Society. In the moment when the mind is empty, he noticed something strange. Originally, he would have felt that the flowing power throughout his body was even. He needs to activate that part of his body with his thoughts to tap the potential of that part. This will also become one of Shen Fei's arguments for the dominant X gene and the recessive X gene. Meditation will help ordinary people develop the ability of the recessive X gene. The ability to judge what kind of X recessive gene one has by the difficulty of activation in the body. But now Shen Fei's perception is that the part of his tailbone is naturally much more active than before. Shen Fei only needs to gently move it with his mind. He could feel his tailbone activating crazily. At this time, only a little warmth would appear in the past. At this moment, it was as if the heat of magma was spreading from his tailbone upwards, like a volcano erupting, gushing into his entire spine. Shen Fei felt this feeling calmly, interrupted his meditation, and found that the heat was still flowing through his entire spine. Connors, beta rays are hitting my spine. Shen Fei opened his eyes and ordered. This would be the first step in him starting to really use his mystical side powers to strengthen himself. The use of demonic power to strengthen before was too superficial, a bit like a beast hitting it with a stone, but if he could do it this time, he could succeed. He will carve the dragon's bones to serve as a vessel for demonic power. Coupled with the strong magnetic force, it does not even require external equipment. It only needs to be implanted in some organs to achieve the strengthening effect, which is even more powerful. Mainly, he found that using external equipment to harness the power of demons to escape was too serious. If you use one strong spectrum to strengthen it, 0.1 strong spectrum will dissipate after half an hour. This is a marginal function superposition, so it will become weaker and weaker, and external devices must be supplemented. So the previous, Devil Transformer, was just used by Shenfei for testing. The biochemical demon transformer he wants to implant in his body is the most suitable version. Connors irradiated Shenfei's spine with beta rays. Soon, under the beta rays, Shenfei's entire spine produced a fluorescent reaction, which became more intense as it approached the bottom. Shenfei wanted to get out the dragon's power from his spine, but found that it still didn't work. Instead, he felt that his power was constantly increasing with the strengthening of the dragon's power. Boss, just now the power of your tailbone spread outward in a filamentous shape, but when it spread to a part of the body, it began to fade away. After hearing this, Shenfei came to the experimental platform and used all the stored longevity energy. Try to transfer all this longevity energy to my spine. Shenfei suspected that the amount was not enough. You should know that what Iron Fist got was the power of a whole head of Shoulao. This bone of his is from who knows how many years ago. The power within may extend one's life, but it may take more to mobilize it. Connors nodded and looked at the milky white power that was constantly rolling. Although he did not understand the mysterious side of power. But the control device is still known. He controlled the strong magnetic force to guide the longevity energy from the box like water flow, and instilled it towards Shenfei's spine. Shenfei suddenly felt a hot flow like magma pouring into his body, trying to burn away his flesh and blood. Meditation. Shenfei began to meditate again and put all his meditation power on his spine. In his fantasy, the spine was like a glutton, beginning to open its big mouth and continuously swallowing up the infused energy of longevity. Boss, there are dragon patterns on your back. Connors saw a dragon pattern similar to Daniel's before appearing on Shenfei's back. It's just that this dragon's body is more slender. Shenfei had no reaction to what Connors said. He was still immersed in his visualization, and the incoming dragon power began to rely on the bottom keel. As Shenfei's spine continued to be transformed upwards, the bone tissue, red bone marrow, yellow bone marrow, etc. inside were all being infected by the milky white power. And Shenfei began to use his mind to control the power in his spine. According to his memory, the original root in Iron Fist's body began to operate. Because there is a spine as the base, these powers do not escape like the power of demons, but obediently build the same running patterns as the Iron Fist. Suddenly, a surge of energy surged into Shenfei's hands. Shenfei opened his eyes and looked at the power of the dragon emerging from his hands. And at the same time, the power of the dragon began to stimulate the power of the whole body through the meridian spreading out from the spine. This is much more powerful than the power of demons. Shenfei couldn't help but murmured that this power was too terrifying, and he could not even use 1% of it now, most of it was still stored in his spine. It was like Daniel's dragon power was stored in the tattoo on his chest. After dissecting Daniel, he found that the dragon pattern was like a thin film attached to the surface of Daniel's chest muscles. He couldn't reproduce this pattern, because he found that Daniel's genes had not changed at all. This is not a physical change, but a mysterious change. This is why he tried to transplant the keel. Because this is the only object he can find that, in addition to strong magnetism, combined the mysterious power of the dragon and the devil. He has already modeled all the structures of the keel, and he needs to experience for himself whether he can fulfill his vision before he can make up his mind whether to develop the Devil series. For now, it should be feasible. Connors, start testing my indicators. I need to know what the increase is now. The electrode pads were attached to Shenfei's body one by one. After Shenfei turned off the power of the dragon, data appeared on the instrument one by one. But the next moment, as Shenfei activated the power of the dragon, the index on the device instantly exploded. All display the value of. Boss, the test can't come out. I saw it. I just go and test my strength. Shen Fei looked at the dragon tattoo on his back through the mirror. It was quite handsome. Now he can be regarded as the super dragon. Shen Fei couldn't help but tease himself. He came to the side to test the strength of the alloy wall. Last time he used a strong spectrum of demonic power and the strength reached 35T. And a portion of the divine dragon's power, which is the energy of longevity, is probably a strong spectrum of 10. In other words, one portion is equivalent to 10 portions of demonic power. In addition, he uses roots to amplify rather than disperse, so the concentration level is different. Shen Fei took a deep breath, and milky white power suddenly emerged from his fist. A punch blasted out, and a boom sound exploded, and waves of air rolled up all around, making the surrounding equipment jingle. Boom. Single quote. When the fist fell, the entire alloy wall shattered in an instant, turning into fragments and sputtering in all directions. Connors watched Shen Fei's performance on the camera, and he couldn't help but swallowed. They calculated that this alloy wall can withstand a force of 100T. Shen Fei now has a strength of 100T. 100T was a level that could destroy a building with one punch, and he felt that Shen Fei hadn't used all his strength yet. It was just a light punch. Is this still a human being? Isn't this the god who came to the world? Connors murmured. In the testing room, Shen Fei was not surprised by this result. After all, his original physical strength is much stronger than Iron Fist. It still needs to be developed. Shen Fei felt the almost unlimited potential contained in his body, but it was a pity that he could not obtain Kunlun's Book of Iron Fist, which was the use of the power of the dragon passed down from the Iron Fist of the past generations. If he gets it, Shen Fei should develop another part of it. He even got Kunlun's meditation method. Shang Sheng has a meditation method, and it is impossible for Kunlun not to have it, and it may even be more advanced. We can only find it from Daniel. Shen Fei was thinking as he walked out of the door. At this time, a ray of sunlight shone in from the glass window. Unexpectedly, it was already dawn. Connors, you can go back and take a rest. Shen Fei looked at Connors. Although Connors was extremely healthy now after being injected with Phoenix number 3, mental fatigue still existed. Otherwise, Logan wouldn't want to sleep. Boss, I'm going to study Jessica's potion again. I already have an idea. Quote. Connors shook his head and turned around to leave after seeing that nothing happened to Shen Fei. What a hard worker, the rest should take a page from Connors. Shen Fei did not refuse, nor did he think of taking a rest. He also needs to study Charles's potion to see if he can obtain Charles's telekinesis. Since Daniel wouldn't let go, he would directly use his mind to find the relevant memories. Now that the mysterious series has come to an end, Shen Fei will have to wait until Shen Fei takes the time to recreate the devil's bones that can hold the power of the devil. It's been calculated. Charles's genetic model has been calculated. Next, Shen Fei needs to modify the specific points of the gene to the most suitable part for him, which is another huge project. Let's get started. 2 days later, a man and a woman walked into Osborne Company. The man was very handsome, with a very strong figure, and he was wearing a suit that clearly outlined his muscles. The woman has a variety of charms, her long hair is as bright as a rose, and her facial features are like those carved by the most perfect carver in the world. Fair skin, fine and tight, without Caucasian freckles, pores, etc. Both men and women are extremely eye-catching, and they attracted the attention of many people as soon as they entered the company. The two walked to the front desk, and the man asked the lady at the front desk with a smile. Hello, I'm Rogers. Is your director, Dr. Shen, here? After all, he was here to get Scott back, so Rogers was quite polite. He persuaded Wanda for 2 days before letting her leave the room and come to Osborne Company with him. Do you have an appointment? The front desk lady was dazzled by Rogers' smile, but she still kept her duties in mind and asked calmly. No, please contact your director and tell him that Captain America has something to do. Captain America, the young lady exclaimed, but soon her admiring eyes were filled with disgust. The front desk lady's scream made the others recognize Rogers. But Rogers found that what greeted him was not the respect and admiration he used to have, but disgust, heartfelt disgust. It's like looking at a coiled poisonous snake and wanting to stay away from it. How could it be like this? Rogers murmured in his heart. Wanda looked around and couldn't help but lower her head. The sights of these people were like sharp swords piercing her heart, always reminding her of what happened in Sokovia before. The king of Wakanda's questions about their superheroes were still ringing in her ears. You can just call. Rogers took a deep breath. He firmly believed that he was not wrong. The power of superheroes can only be controlled in his own hands. If they want to act according to the charter, they will only limit their power. He had a clear conscience, just like that battle that year. If he hadn't made a prompt decision, all the Howling Commandos would have died in the Hydra ambush. But back then Bucky still fell off the cliff. I don't have the authority to ask Dr. Shen directly. I can only call Director Norman. Although the front desk lady's eyes were full of disgust, she also knew that Rogers was a public figure. Even if she doesn't want to call anymore, she can't not complete her work because of her personal preference. Soon, the front desk lady whispered a few words. He hung up the phone respectfully, looked at Rogers and the two and said, Dr. Shen is doing experiments now. But Director Norman is free, do you want to come up? Good. Under the strange gazes of everyone, Rogers and Wanda stepped onto the elevator. Just as the elevator was about to close, a figure rushed in quickly. I was almost late, sorry. Peter apologized quickly and suddenly glanced at Rogers and said in surprise, Are you Captain America? I am. Rogers breathed a sigh of relief when he saw the surprise in Peter's eyes. Osborn finally had someone in the company who didn't hate him. I didn't expect that I would actually meet Captain America. If Gwen knew, she would definitely envy me. My name is Peter Parker and I'm a fan of yours, Captain America. Quote. Hello, Peter. Rogers nodded, and soon he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. This child seemed not simple. Peter smiled and said, I'm an intern here and I love the Avengers. They are all superheroes. Soon, the floor stopped at the 4th floor, and Peter walked out quickly and said, I will continue to support you, Captain. After Peter stepped out of the elevator, the surprised expression on his face disappeared, and he sent a text message to an email address on his mobile phone, Mr. Stark, I'm at work today. After it showed that the transmission was successful, Peter put the phone into his pocket. He naturally knows that the Avengers have now been divided into 2 parts. He has joined Mr. Stark's camp, and now that he has discovered information about Captain America, he naturally has to tell Mr. Stark in a hurry. What if the chairman is pulled over by Captain America? He didn't want to fight his boss. Rogers and Wanda had already arrived at the top floor of the Osborn building, where people were already waiting. Harry looked at Rogers and said with a smile, Welcome Captain America, I'm Harry. Hello, Harry. Rogers also smiled and said that he knew who Harry was, Norman's son. He should be the original heir to Osborn Company. He once heard that Hill tried to win over him when he was in charge here, but it seems that he has failed so far. Even Hill doesn't come here often anymore. There is no way. Osborn Company only pays dividends to her, and she has no real power in Osborn Company. The two followed Harry into the office. Hello you two. Norman said with a smile, you two sit down first, would you like something to drink, coffee, mineral water or tea? My boss likes tea. Quote. Then let's have tea. Rogers nodded, and suddenly his eyes narrowed, because Norman's shield hung in his office. There's no mistaking the old guy he's been using for decades. Even the coating on it. The coating turned into a capital S. Rogers suddenly felt something in his heart. He felt as if something of his was being taken away. I'll just drink water, Wanda said softly, and Harry nodded and went out to have tea and water brought up. You two can wait for a while, the boss's experiment may still take some time. Norman's expression now looks like he has never criticized a superhero before. Harry suddenly said, By the way, Director. Today the King of Wakanda will give a speech at the United Nations. Hearing these words, Rogers and Wanda were shocked. Norman looked at Rogers and Wanda, Why don't you two take a look with us? I'm also curious about what he will say. After finishing speaking, Harry had turned on the big TV in the office. What is shown above is exactly the scene when the current King of Wakanda, T'Chaka, steps onto the podium. I have a dream. It starts with a quote from Martin Luther King. T'Chaka came prepared this time, or it could be said that someone was behind this. As his speech progressed, the audience became more and more indignant. Describe superheroes as vigilantes. Now that they have power, they should limit the use of their powers. Otherwise, wouldn't they just hand over a submachine gun to a drug addict? Moreover, superheroes have powers that ordinary people cannot resist. But the aftermath they caused during the battle was enough to kill ordinary people. However, no one will ask the superhero to pay for his life, and even going to court to sue seems to be a matter of course. Finally, he thanked Iron Man for supporting his decision and coming to sign this agreement. Rogers and Wanda watched in silence as T'Chaka became more and more excited as he talked on the TV. Rogers couldn't help but look at Wanda next to him. He had experienced a lot himself. There is actually no right or wrong about this matter. It's just that their positions are different, but Wanda has never experienced so many of these things. In an instant, the praise for her turned into abuse, especially when T'Chaka specifically mentioned Wanda. It's an uncontrollable nuclear bomb. Wanda, it's not your fault. If Crossbones and the others were allowed to take away the biological weapons, more people would die. Rogers hurriedly comforted her. The bright red color that had just appeared in Wanda's eyes began to fade. She took a deep breath and said, "Captain, I'm fine." Venus International Center. T'Challa stood by the window, listening to his father's speech. Suddenly his eyes fell below, and there was a great commotion below. Frightened screams and loud scoldings came from below, and vague voices sounded from the walkie-talkies worn on the shoulders of the security personnel scattered around the square. "Careful!" T'Challa roared and flew towards T'Chaka. A figure that suddenly rushed out suddenly turned into rapidly expanding flames, soaring into the sky and tearing apart everything within the explosion radius, swallowing everything in the square. All the glass walls of the Vienna International Center were shattered by the shock wave, and the concrete building was scorched black. Glass shards in the sun rained down on the granite slabs thrown up by the explosion. T'Challa, who was knocked to the ground by the shock wave, felt that his lungs were filled with smoke, and the smell of burning metal was everywhere. The horrific explosion shocked everyone. "Father!" T'Challa yelled. T'Chaka's fingers moved in the distance to show that he could still be saved. T'Challa hurriedly took out a small spray from his arms and wanted to rush to T'Challa, but suddenly he saw a figure rushing out from the corner of his eye. T'Challa yelled ferociously, "No!" The monstrous fire emerged again, and this time the entire floor erupted in horrific flames. The fire engulfed the entire floor. In the office, the display screen hanging on the wall was instantly filled with firelight. Next moment, the screen went black, and the cameras in the International Center had been destroyed by the explosion. When Wanda saw this scene, she couldn't help but tremble in her heart. How similar it was to what happened to her in Nigeria. In an instant, she subconsciously recalled the original scene, and she couldn't help but feel fear in her heart, as well as the disgust and abuse that other people had towards her during this period. "Wanda, calm down." Rogers panicked after seeing the explosion, since what happened last time in Nigeria. Wanda easily loses control every time she hears an explosion or fire. She was determined by a professional psychologist that Wanda was probably suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD. It just so happened that the place where the explosion occurred was also the place where the agreement they were concerned about was signed. Due to many factors, Wanda kept thinking about what happened in Nigeria. Rogers kept comforting Wanda, but at this time Wanda could no longer hear any sounds. The scene of the explosion and the people who died in the explosion were constantly recalled in his mind. Every scene was stimulating her brain. "What kind of superhero are you? A murderer? You killed my son. It's all you who killed me. I didn't have to die in the first place." The noisy sound kept echoing in Wanda's ears, like countless flies buzzing in her ears, which made Wanda extremely irritable. She wanted to destroy the flies in her ears. At this time, bursts of bright red light appeared around Wanda, and her eyes suddenly flashed with intense red light, like two blood-red stars shining in her eyes. And the red light on her body became more and more intense. Rogers couldn't help but growl, "Shit! If Wanda broke out here, then the entire Osborn building may be destroyed." He knew how powerful Wanda was. At this time, a figure pushed open the door and came to Wanda's side with a speed that even Rogers could not detect. "You," Rogers just said, "you." The figure who walked in had already put his hand on Wanda's hand. "It's okay, Everything has passed, it's not your fault. You were just careless, you didn't mean to. Shen Fei's voice was extremely gentle, and seemed to contain a power as gentle as water. The power of the dragon continued to enter Wanda's body from the two people's clasped hands, soothing Wanda's mind. The power of the dragon and the power of the mind worked together. Wanda seemed to be comforted, the red light on her body began to flicker, and the red light in her eyes gradually faded. It was Shen Fei who walked in. After just being injected with Charles' serum, before he had time to realize the power he had gained, his spider sense and super senses came into play. He felt that a strong energy was about to burst out in the office. Shen Fei hurriedly used his super senses to model the scene in the office, and found that there was a man and a woman in the office. That terrifying energy burst out from that woman's body. At this time, the only woman who could possess such powerful energy was Wanda. And it seems to be in an unstable state. Shen Fei did not go over immediately, but quickly came to the unconscious Daniel, searched his memory with the newly acquired telekinesis, and rummaged out all the knowledge in the Book of Iron Fist. Although Shen Fei's mental power was just acquired, he is not yet proficient in using it. But the target was also a comatose person, so he couldn't resist, so it was easy. After Shen Fei obtained the Book of Iron Fist, he quickly digested the knowledge in the Book of Iron Fist on the road, especially regarding hypnosis and mental soothing. As Shen Fei continued to hypnotize and comfort her, Wanda's out-of-control power finally subsided, and Wanda seemed to have had all her strength drained out of her body. His whole body went limp and he wanted to fall to the ground, but Shen Fei caught him. What happened to me just now? Wanda shook her head, feeling the male aura coming towards her face, which made her face blush. Realizing that he was actually in the arms of a man, he quickly broke free. Shen Fei let go of Wanda smoothly. You almost destroyed my company just now. Shen Fei. At this time, Rogers also saw clearly who was coming. Although the white people all think that the yellow people all look the same, Shen Fei is still very clear about it. After all, he was the one who took away his shield. Rogers, long time no see. Shen Fei sat on the sofa nearby and said with a smile. When Wanda realized what almost happened, she just sat on the sofa in silence. At this time, the darkened display screen lit up again. But the picture is no longer the Vienna International Center. But it's already in the TV station. The host of the TV station, Shen Fei, also knew him, the Christine from Vanity Fair. Christine was reporting on the violent explosion that had just occurred. There was a violent explosion just now at the Venus International Center, and firefighters are now extinguishing the fire and rescuing people inside the building. The superhero Iron Man also arrived successfully and assisted the firefighters in putting out the fire. Quote, on the live news broadcast, steel figures floated in the sky, and dry ice was continuously sprayed out from the palms of their hands to extinguish the fire of the burning building. This is a terrible terrorist attack. Now the FBI is looking for the suspect through clues. Were the two explosions the work of a group of people or a joint crime? Who did it is still under investigation. The number of casualties in this explosion is still being counted. This meeting was mainly the signing ceremony of the Sokovia Accords proposed by the King of Wakanda not long ago. It is commonly known as the Heroes Act. Now we also know that Captain America, who was once the spirit of America, stood on the opposite side of the government and the people. The purpose of this explosion is undoubtedly to prevent the signing of the agreement. Is this related to the opposition led by Captain America? The next step will undoubtedly be speculation, estimates of the culprit of the bombing, etc. This is the media's method to create excitement. Okay, I've finished reading the news. I wonder if Captain America has something to do with me, an ordinary citizen. Shen Fei asked Harry to turn off the TV. There was nothing nutritious behind it, and looked at Rogers, who fell silent. Scott was caught by you last night. Shen Fei's words brought Rogers back to his senses. This was not the time to think about the hero bill. The key was to save Ant-Man first. Wait a minute, who is Scott? Shen Fei asked, pretending not to recognize him. That's the one who grew bigger and smaller last night. Oh, is that the thief who tried to sneak into our company and steal our trade secrets? I have asked Norman to investigate. He is a habitual pickpocket. I originally planned to send him to the police station today and accuse him of stealing our trade secrets. Shen Fei drank tea and looked at Rogers with a smile. He wanted to see what the man who always praised his justice would say when faced with what Scott had done. I apologize on his behalf. Rogers took a deep breath. He either stole Osborne's trade secrets, or he wanted to get them back for me. Rogers pointed to the shield hanging there, which had been coated by Shen Fei. The star that originally represented the United States was changed to a red S logo. That's also a trade secret of the company. How can it not be considered a trade secret if it involves some important research of the company? Shen Fei naturally knew that Scott was here for the shield. But now the shield was his trophy, his thing. Taking something without asking is stealing. That was originally the captain's shield. Wanda, who had been silent all this time, spoke, although she was very grateful that Shen Fei had calmed her down in some way just now. But she is Roger's teammate and she wants to speak for the captain. But that's my trophy. That night, if I remember correctly, you should be the first to attack me. According to the law, I was acting in self-defense. I didn't snatch it, I just picked up this shield downstairs in my company. And you told me that when Rogers came to my company and attacked me, he was still helping people from Hydra. Do you think he did the right thing? Quote, Shen Fei's words made Wanda stunned. She actually didn't know so many things. During this time, she had been staying in the room and closing herself in. All she knew was that Captain's shield fell into the hands of someone else, and that this person was powerful and needed her help. In addition, one of their companions was also captured by this person. Out of trust in the captain, she did not ask in detail, and she thought that she and the captain were now on the same camp. Since he is the captain's companion, he is also her companion. That's why she agreed to step out of the room and help Rogers. Shen Fei suddenly told her that there was another hidden reason behind this matter. Wanda couldn't help but look at Rogers. According to her understanding, the captain was not such a person. What went wrong here? Rogers looked a little embarrassed. Because what Shen Fei said is the truth. That night, in order to save Bucky, he did attack Shen Fei, and last night it was Scott who first planned to steal, and then was caught. No matter how you look at both things, they are at fault. Shen Fei looked at the embarrassed Rogers. Rogers did have the spirit that Americans admired, pursuing freedom, justice, etc. But he just has a fatal weakness, nostalgia. He has never integrated into this era, and his soul still remains in the last century. So when Avengers 4 was about to end, Rogers chose to stay in the last century and gradually grow old. But that's the future. He woke up from the ice and found that everyone he knew was old, and even the people he loved most were old and even dead. Therefore, he attaches great importance to the people and things related to him in the past. This is his nostalgia for the past, this is his memory. Originally there was Paige, but now he only has Bucky left, and he chooses to stick to it, even if he is separated from Tony and the others. So, you think you can pick a random time to come to my door and ask me for my things and the criminals who are going to steal my things? I will give it to you. Or do you think I should leave it to you? Quote. Shen Fei sneered, these superheroes are indeed used to freedom. He thought Rogers would be more thoughtful if he didn't reply to his message. I didn't expect that he would come to the door so arrogantly. Rogers looked even more embarrassed when Shen Fei said that, and even felt a little ashamed. The shield was one thing, he had to get Scott back. It was him who had dragged him into this vortex, and now he was in trouble for himself. The only one who can save him is himself. Then tell me how to release Scott. Rogers is not a fool. Since Shen Fei did not interrupt the topic, it means there is still a chance. It's just that there are not enough chips. Let me see. Shen Fei then realized that Rogers was a poor man, and the most valuable thing about him was his identity and shield. But in the context of the Heroes Act, Rogers, Captain America's successor, was not recognized by the government. And the shield was already in his hand. Shen Fei couldn't even imagine what he could get from him. So he chose to throw the question back to Rogers, what do you think you could give in exchange for Scott? As long as you want it, I can give it to you. As long as it doesn't violate the law or harm other people, I can give you whatever you want. Rogers said seriously. The ball was kicked back to Shen Fei. Shen Fei suddenly thought of a key point. Captain America was not only himself, but behind him there was S.H.I.E.L.D. lurking in the dark. That guy Nick knows a lot of things. And there are a lot of good things about S.H.I.E.L.D. The Destroyer, Banner's biochemical materials, Thor's biochemical materials, Captain Marvel's biochemical materials, derivatives of the Infinity Stones, etc., or the genetic information of mutants and aliens in S.H.I.E.L.D. These are all fine. You take out whatever you want, and Scott is yours. Quote, after careful calculation, I found that S.H.I.E.L.D. really has a lot of good stuff, and some of it was even sealed because it was too dangerous. If you don't want to study it, then leave it to me. When Rogers heard what Shen Fei said, he couldn't help but said, but I don't have these. And this is S.H.I.E.L.D. stuff, not mine. Quote, just ask Nick if he can get it. Can. Okay, this is my condition. Whenever you take it out, I will put Scott back. As for the S.H.I.E.L.D., if you can come up with 2 things, I can give it back to you. Quote. Shen Fei interrupted what Rogers wanted to say and drank the tea in one gulp. He continued, I love doing deals. Because in my opinion trading is about everyone getting what they need. But I don't like thieves, if you don't want Scott to be arrested for theft. Hope you soon. Of course, if you think you can get Scott out of prison through S.H.I.E.L.D., you can let Nick try. Let him not think that having Captain Marvel's pager means he has control over the Earth. The Earth's water is deeper than he thought. Quote, Shen Fei revealed Nick Fury's trump card without any scruples. This was also his last resort. How did you know? At this time, Nick's voice suddenly sounded from Wanda's shoulder. I just said, with your character, how could you not monitor Wanda, an unstable factor? But isn't it a bit unethical for you to put micro-monitors on women's bodies? Quote. Shen Fei was actually not surprised by this. Monitor superheroes, especially extremely dangerous superheroes. This is Nick Fury's habit. He doesn't trust anyone, including Captain America. I know a lot more than you think I do. Consider my opinion carefully. To be honest, some things in your hands are just sealed. You might as well leave it to me to study. Quote, what Shen Fei just said was for Nick. There is a 99% chance that Nick is monitoring Wanda. Because Wanda's power is too powerful. Nick treats Wanda like he treats the Hulk. Desire for his power, hoping to use his power as a trump card. But they were afraid of his power and used many means to limit his existence. This is why the last powerful superhumans were alienated from Nick Fury. Nick needs a controllable weapon, not a free strongman. But how could a truly strong man be under Nick's jurisdiction? A layer of light red light spread across Wanda's body. Then her shoulders burst into flames. Wanda thought that her behavior during this period was actually being monitored, which made her feel that she was not trusted by Nick at all. Rogers, I can't help you with this. Go find Director Nick. Wanda shook her head, stood up, looked at Shen Fei and said, thank you this time. It is an honor to serve a beautiful lady. If you still need me at that time, you can come to me directly. Ha ha ha. Quote, Shen Fei smiled and said that maybe Wanda had mastered chaos magic and looked much younger than he knew. It can be said that it is time for Omei to reach her peak beauty. This is quite to Shen Fei's taste. It would be pretty good if I could fall in love with her and study her genes and abilities. Wanda left without paying any attention to Rogers' expression. Rogers looked at Shen Fei's behavior as if he was trying to force a corner, and took a deep breath. I will go back and think about it carefully. If it weren't for Wanda, he wouldn't even bother to come out to see Rogers. But he was curious, now that Bucky was captured by Stark, who was going to complete the mission. Could it be that Zemo did it himself? This guy Zemo definitely likes to hide in the shadows and sow discord among the Avengers. Because this universe is a fusion of movies and some comics, he doesn't know whether the Zemo behind it is one of the leaders of Hydra, or a person whose family died at the hands of Ultron. If it's the former, it's normal to use the rest of the power. If it's the latter, it's a bit strange. Shen Fei thought about it for a while and then immediately put it behind him. It had nothing to do with him anyway and his goal had been achieved. Boss, we've got it. There is such a passage on Shen Fei's cell phone. We'll have a meeting in the afternoon, and Norman will inform Connors, Max and Crow to come. Harry, come too. Quote, now T'Chaka is dead. Next, the hero's act will be pushed to the forefront, and the turmoil after that will become extremely intense. Of course it is also a good time for him to get many things he wants. Otherwise, the situation has been stable. How could he fish in troubled waters? After finishing speaking, Norman and Harry quickly said, yes, boss. Especially Harry's face was full of excitement, which meant that he had officially squeezed into Shen Fei's trusted circle. You shouldn't have believed that old woman's words in the first place. How did it turn out? Inside the residence, Barton and Falcon looked at Wanda, who had returned, and Barton couldn't help but ask. Wanda glanced at Barton and Falcon. Do you also know the reason why Captain's shield was lost and the reason why Scott was caught by Shen Fei? Barton and Falcon looked at each other, and Barton nodded. I know. Ask Rogers yourselves. Where's Natasha? Wanda realized that the other figure was not here. She went to the scene where the agreement was signed. Barton was a little silent, and Natasha, who had been struggling for a long time, finally chose to sign the agreement. She was originally more supportive of Stark, but this period of time was entirely because of Rogers speaking out in person. Natasha only helped them for a period of time because of Rogers' request and Nick's order. But that doesn't mean she's in Team America's camp. Is she okay? Wanda thought of the violent explosion. She's fine. When Barton saw the violent explosion, he was also shocked, but thinking about Natasha's almost immortal physique, how could she die in this explosion? Soon Natasha sent a message telling him that she was already working with Stark to save people. Wanda looked at Barton and knew that he was hiding something from her. But forget it. I'm going to rest first. After Wanda finished speaking, she went directly to her room. Patton and Falcon looked at each other, so this was a failure. Not long after, Rogers also came back, and Barton and Falcon listened to what happened in the office. Thinking of Wanda's attitude just now. Now what? I'm probably going to go talk to Nick. Rogers was silent for a moment, and at this moment the phone in the house rang. Hello, I'm Tony, come to the building. Tony's voice rang on the phone, and after finishing speaking, he hung up the phone without even asking them if they wanted to go over. Barton was stunned for a moment when he heard the beeping sound from the other side. Tony said, let's go to Avengers Tower. Walk. After Rogers and others reached the top floor of the building, they found that even Natasha was here. Not only that, Vision, T'Challa, and Colonel Rhodes were all here. You take a look at this first. Tony didn't speak, but turned on the projection. A video is playing above, which is a recording from a surveillance camera, and there is a date in the lower left corner. December 16, 1991. The video is very blurry, but it can be seen that a car is passing by, just when the car is about to leave the camera range. A motorcycle stopped the car instantly. Sitting on the motorcycle was an instant noodle head. A cruel thing happened. The instant noodle head who got off the motorcycle ripped open the door of the car, pulled out the man in the driver's seat, and punched him to death. The woman in the passenger seat kept begging for mercy, but the instant noodle head ignored the woman's begging for mercy and punched her to death. Then the car's fuel tank was ignited, and the car body exploded with a loud bang. The instant noodle rider got back on his motorcycle and drove away. The video was short, but Rogers watched in silence. Tony's eyes were red and he clenched his fists, taking deep breaths to tell himself to calm down. Friday, kill Bucky. Tony suddenly spoke. Rogers was shocked and yelled, "You can't do this. How do you know this videotape is real? Old antique, I understand technology better than you. I can't tell if it's true." Falcon. Rogers shouted loudly, and Falcon was controlling the mechanical bird outside. Suddenly there was the sound of gunshots and the sound of breaking glass. "If Bucky dies, I will definitely make you pay with your life." Rogers lost his temper and yelled at Tony for the first time. "Peggy is dead, Bucky will never die again." Shen Fei waited until Rogers and the others left. After arriving in the prison, he now has 4 samples, returning to his peak. Black Sky, Daniel, Rhino Man, and Scott. Although the last one can be ignored, although it is also said that Scott is special. He can grow up to 30 feet and shrink down to parts of the quantum realm. But to Shen Fei, his research value is far lower than that of Rhino Man and Black Sky. Now Haikong has also studied it thoroughly, and in the end his result is nothing more than escaping and being completely drained of his power. Of course, if Beast makes a deal with him, he intends to exchange his occult knowledge for his freedom. He'll let it go, too. Finally, he looked at Daniel. Daniel was still in a coma. In fact, for Shen Fei, Daniel's role was gone. His only role was to use him to control the Rand Corporation. The Rand Corporation is also a large company, but it is said to be now controlled by the Hand. Shen Fei was hesitating whether to try to control Daniel. Although his scientific research value is gone, his social value is still there. Forget it, since there is no scientific research value. After acquiring all his memories, especially the location of Kunlun, just treat it as scientific research waste. Shen Fei thought about it and realized that he didn't like too many variables. He likes scientific research, and he likes to turn variables into fixed numbers. This is the charm of scientific research. But I don't like uncontrollable variables in my future. Therefore, it is better for Daniel to die. As for the Kunlun side, wait until his strength is almost the same before going there. Shen Fei asked his assistant to pull Daniel out and put his hands on Daniel's head. The power of the dragon and the power of telepathy entered Daniel's mind. Although he had already read it once just now, time was urgent, so he focused on the information related to the Book of Iron Fist, and he did not look at the most critical location of Kunlun. Although he knew that the 7 cities of the Kingdom of Heaven were all located on Kunlun Mountain, they still had to have specific locations. As a steady stream of memories were obtained by Shen Fei also learned more about the uses of the dragon's power. But the next moment, a pair of huge golden vertical pupils suddenly appeared in Shen Fei's eyes. Shen Fei found that he was no longer in the laboratory. Instead, it was in a mysterious place. It was pitch black around this place and there was no light at all. The only light was the huge thing in front of Shen Fei. Countless flames were burning all around. This behemoth resembled the evil dragon in Western legends, but its body was not that bloated and had the slenderness of Eastern aesthetics. Stupid mortal, how dare you steal the power of a dragon? Sounds like roars sounded in Shen Fei's ears. Although Shou Lao possesses the power of a divine dragon, Shen Fei knows that it is not a good thing. Shou Lao has 2 origins. One was originally a fisherman who made a living by fishing, but after courting the dragon girl, he directly played the trick of pulling out the Kun Ruthless. Then he hid in Kunlun Mountain, and Long Yan was furious when the Dragon King knew about it. Pai Shou Lao's brother-in-law Qingtang came to Kunlun directly as a dragon and almost bloodbathed the entire Kunlun city after avenging the dragon girl. Qingtang suddenly got mad and regretted his act of killing innocent people. Later, with the help of Master Khan, he turned Shou Lao into a dragon and imprisoned him in Kunlun Mountain. He took out his heart and put it in a big pot that was constantly cooking. In the pot, while Shou Lao was immortal, he was also experiencing the pain of eternal life. Another version of the origin of Shou Lao sets its predecessor as a giant dragon summoned from other dimensions by a magician named Changming, which is somewhat similar to a beast. It was originally a weapon used by Chongming to conquer Kunlun City, but was later beaten up by the first-generation Daniel and took away its dragon power. Shou Lao's mission becomes a cycle of being killed, resurrected, and killed. Because only by killing Shou Lao can one obtain the power of the dragon. Shen Fei looked at Shou Lao indifferently. This was nothing more than an imprint in Daniel's mind. What helped Daniel control his power before was Daniel's tattoo. How could Daniel himself master such a huge power, so there must be relevant forces in Daniel to help him control it. The original pattern that looked like wings was probably where the spiritual imprint was stored. Reptile. Shen Fei shook his head. Ever since he knew the origin of Shou Lao, he knew that Shou Lao was just a tool, an immortal tool. Otherwise, he would help by sending all the energy of longevity into his body. No matter what Shou Lao said to Daniel. But Shen Fei knew that the essence of Shou Lao was actually like that. However, the power of the divine dragon is indeed very strong, and Shen Fei feels that it is not entirely Shou Lao's fault. Seeing Shen Fei's disdainful expression, Shou Lao growled, "You have stolen the power of the dragon, and you will be targeted by me. Why are you staring? You come out of Kunlun first. Now I am the 67th Iron Fist." As Shen Fei's mental power surged, the illusion in front of him disappeared. If it weren't for the purpose of seeing what this Shou Lao looked like, he felt like he could come out as soon as he entered. At this time, the lines on Daniel's chest were weakening. Shen Fei didn't know why Shou Lao wanted to help Daniel control the power of the dragon, but it seemed like it for now. Shou Lao is more like a set assessment. Anyone who kills it can gain the power of longevity and the method of controlling it. In that case, this is more like a deprivation than a gift. Shou Lao put gold on his face. Of course, no matter what, it seems that Shou Lao's power is indeed much stronger than that of the beast. Burn it. Shen Fei glanced at Daniel and then looked at the assistant next to him. Daniel was a waste until he regained the Rand Corporation. As for killing Daniel will offend Kunlun. He would have offended Kunlun by taking away Daniel's power, not to mention that the Jade Emperor of Kunlun is now Daniel's childhood sweetheart. The assistant pushed the unconscious Daniel into the incinerator, and with a swish sound, a raging fire broke out. Shen Fei looked at the blazing fire. This was the third superhero who died under his hands. Of the 4 members of the Defenders, 3 have now died directly or indirectly at his hands. The last man left is Wonder Man Luke. Crow has learned that Luke is now in prison again. And I heard that in the military prison, the news that Crow found out was that Ross planned to study Luke again and see if his abilities could be copied to other people. But there seems to be no news at the moment. Therefore, Crow kept giving subtle hints that this project could actually be handed over to Osborne Company for research. In the laboratory, Alexei, who had been in a coma, was lying on 2 experimental beds. Because of its size, it cannot fit on an experimental bed. Shen Fei used a vibranium scalpel to cut a portion of rhinoceros skin from Alexei's abdomen and observed it under a microscope. Under the microscope, rhinoceros skin shows an extremely dense surface structure, neatly arranged and comparable to an insect exoskeleton. Moreover, there was an extra layer of strong polymer on the surface of the cells. Shen Fei scraped it off and measured it using the peptide bond assay method. It was indeed made of polypeptide polymerization. A polypeptide polymer similar to an exoskeleton has actually grown, and it is as tight as metal. Alexei's skin is attached to a layer of extremely hard rhinoceros skin. This rhinoceros skin is also Alexei's most important means, making it indestructible. The self-healing ability has not been changed. Suddenly, Shen Fei saw that the part of the rhinoceros skin he had cut off was still bleeding, which meant that Alexei did not have strong self-healing ability. Shen Fei sprayed it with self-healing spray, and soon the wound began to heal, but Shen Fei found that the skin that grew out was ordinary skin, not skin like the rhinoceros skin in other places. Rhinoceros hide cannot be regenerated. Suddenly, Shen Fei no longer had the desire to study. This was just like the Dianguang man. It could even be said to be worse than the Dianguang man. This is obviously just a modification of the surface structure of the skin, directly from the cells that have undergone specific changes, regardless of the fact that the defense of this layer of rhinoceros skin is indeed ridiculously high. But the inability to regenerate is a fatal flaw. Unless the original experiment was replicated and Alexei was given the rhinoceros skin again. Although this rhinoceros skin is currently the most defensive among biological materials in Shen Fei's opinion. Even Jessica is not as tall as him. Can be part of Shen Fei's super defense. But this cannot be reborn. It seems that the original experiment plan needs to be found and modified to give this ability from the depths of the gene. However, Alexei's strength can be studied. After all, the strength and speed he displays are also different from ordinary people. Most of these changes in muscle structure are at the genetic level, which means that this kind of strength can be copied. Let's brainwash first. It is relatively easy to brainwash such simple-minded people. It doesn't have much research value and can be used as a weapon. Quote, to be honest, even if it has no scientific research value, Alexei is worth much, much more than Daniel. Daniel's background is too complicated, and Shen Fei doesn't want to deal with various things later. Alexei is a mercenary, simple-minded and impulsive. With Shen Fei's current divine dragon power and telekinesis, it was enough to give him an additional thug who would obey his orders. Shen Fei put his hands on Alexei's head. After a while, Alexei opened his eyes and looked at Shen Fei with eyes full of admiration. Boss. Well, next I need to do some research on you, if you're afraid of pain. I can knock you out. Quote, don't worry, boss, just do your research. This Alexei was originally from the Mauzi gang, but his IQ and ability were not very good. In order to make money, he agreed to be a volunteer in a chemical experiment. Unexpectedly, he succeeded. Not only does it have an indestructible skin, but its strength has also become extremely terrifying. That organization, on the other hand, seemed to have been wiped out by the rhinoceros. I don't know if the experimental materials and records are still there. He has now modified part of his memory. Shen Fei is his boss. It is best for this kind of modification to be consistent with the target's own experience. This guy once joined a gang. Boss is his concept of a boss, especially one who can't turn around. As long as it matches his own limited knowledge reserve, he will firmly believe that this is the case. After all, Alexei himself has undergone various transformations, and he has long been accustomed to this kind of research similar to that of a white mouse. Moreover, Shen Fei only extracted part of his tissue for observation, and did not go too far. Soon, Alexei fell off the experimental table, shaking the laboratory. Be careful, Shen Fei glanced at Alexei, who nodded quickly. This area of yours will be your only weak point from now on. I'll have someone take you to inject Phoenix number 2 later. Shen Fei told Alexei that the skin that grew out of the part of the rhinoceros skin he had cut off was relatively normal. Right in the middle of the abdomen. But once injected with Phoenix number 2, it is no longer a weak point. As for why not inject Phoenix number 3, Alexei is now only controlled by his ability. He can't guarantee whether he will betray him, if follow-up observation finds that it is feasible. You can also inject Phoenix number 3. Otherwise, Shen Fei didn't want to create an immortal rhinoceros monster as his opponent. What is Phoenix 2? Don't ask, just it's a good thing. Hey, thank you, boss. Alexei nodded quickly, and Shen Fei asked Connors to come over and tell him that Alexei was one of his own now and just lead him to inject Phoenix number 2. Connors looked at the tall Alexei. He and Norman thought Alexei would become experimental material, but unexpectedly he turned into one of their own. But since the boss didn't let him inject Phoenix number 3, he must have not become a confidant yet. I understand, come with me. Connors motioned for Alexei to follow. Just the injection site is on his abdomen. Clear. After Connors took Alexei away, Shen Fei rubbed his brows and took off his white coat. What he's most confused about now is super breathing, which is integrating the abilities of Storm and Iceman into his lungs. What he needed was a substance that targeted the expression of genes in his lungs. But Iceman and Storm's abilities are a bit similar to mental control. In Shen Fei's view, they are actually brain magnetic fields. For this kind of mutant who can control energy, Shen Fei thinks that the X gene has acted on the brain. Storm can change the flow speed of the surrounding air and the degree of aggregation of water molecules to achieve the effect of calling for wind and rain. She can even speed up the friction of ions in the clouds and control thunder and lightning. Iceman's original abilities were thought to be only to create low temperatures and create ice. But he discovered that he was not turning water into ice, but creating ice directly out of thin air. It can even be overwhelming. If you are like Paul the fireman, you should carry a lighter with you when riding fire. That's at best the level of a third-level mutant, because you won't be given the material to use your abilities anytime and anywhere. But the Iceman can make ice out of thin air, which is much scarier than riding ice. This means that it can directly slow down the movement of molecules. The essence of temperature is a measure of the average kinetic energy of molecules of an object. Hot and cold is just a physiological sense of temperature by humans. Iceman, on the other hand, can only create ice. He only slows down the movement of water molecules in the air, which is the lowest use of his own abilities. It may also be because he is relatively weak, or the magnetic field in his brain is not strong enough to allow him to perform many operations. Magnetic field. Shen Fei looked at the blood of Storm and Iceman, and an idea suddenly came to him. The key now is simply that the lungs cannot produce corresponding bioelectricity in brain magnetic fields according to human thoughts like the brain, and the ability cannot be limited to the lungs. But what if the lungs could produce effects that corresponded to the magnetic field in the brain? Breathing is also a kind of movement. Movement will produce bioelectricity, and bioelectricity will produce a magnetic field. Generating different magnetic field expressions according to the different intensity of breathing cannot control the strength of the ability. Single quote. This thought suddenly flashed through Shen Fei's mind, and countless thoughts rushed to him in an instant. If the mutant ability is the X gene, the mutant's brain magnetic field can be excited through a certain frequency and frequency band. In order to achieve the purpose of control ability, the X gene is key. The Marvel world is very strange. It seems that there are certain rules in the world, as long as your brain magnetic field can reach the range defined by this rule. You can control the corresponding abilities. Theory of shaping mutant abilities. Shen Fei typed out this document on the computer, which proposed the theory that the X gene is a switch. The proficiency of mutants is nothing more than finding the band range of the brain magnetic field that can master this part of the ability after many attempts. If we can directly grasp the magnetic field band and magnitude in this range, and achieve mutant-like effects through technology, will we be able to master mutant abilities? Shen Fei's eyes flashed. He finally understood why the Sentinel robot, which was originally like garbage, was able to create sentinels that could almost exterminate mutants after acquiring Mystique's genes. Mystique's genetic ability is to imitate, but it is more likely to be able to obtain magnetic field expression, thereby changing her own genes to achieve the effect of replication. It's not just about changing your appearance and body shape, it's not that rubbish. Otherwise, it would be impossible for the Sentinel robot loaded with Mystique's genes to be so outrageous. It's just that Mystique is too good. I thought my ability was to change my appearance and body shape, so I didn't continue to explore. Even the rubber fruit can turn into a sun god. Mystique's genes clearly make her a god of mutant abilities. As long as she can master the magnetic field changes of various mutant abilities. Shen Fei danced with his fingers, writing down his conjectures in the memo. The X gene should be similar to the effect of directional amplification of brain magnetic fields. Otherwise, it would be too difficult to directly affect the macro world in the micro world. Shen Fei revised his initial definition of the X gene. The X gene is a magnetic field band directional amplification mutagen. Shen Fei kept writing papers on the computer. Since the theory of the universality of the X gene cannot allow wild beasts to come to him, he would just use this comprehensive essay on the essence and mutant ability of the X gene. This is just a conjecture, but this conjecture is tantamount to the closest inference to the X gene. And he also made a hypothesis. Although he did not mention the basic idea of the Sentry robot, it was analogous to some methods that can use human technology to achieve mutant abilities. Of course, Shen Fei didn't take Mystique as an example. If she had been seen, the Sentinel robot might have been developed decades in advance. After finishing writing, Shen Fei sent a message to Connors, asking him to list Osborne's research platform website in his name. The bait is now down. It just depends on whether the big fish will take the bait. After finishing writing this paper, it was almost afternoon. Shen Fei looked at the things on his computer. Now he had thoroughly studied the X gene. It was nothing more than a kind of biological engineering. Back then, the Celestial Group was able to put it into human genes, which shows that technology can actually achieve this method. For Shen Fei, it was how to achieve restrictive effects. If it was to master its ability, Shen Fei could just inject it directly. Although he has the spirit of evolution, but there is only one way to master the ability to restrict through the human body, which is to let the restrictive organs have a similar function. It would have been almost impossible because the peristalsis and movement of the organs are spontaneous. The emitted biological magnetic field is chaotic. After all, the electrolyte movement in the cells is also disordered, and the intensity of the generated electric current cannot be controlled at all. But Shen Fei had someone on his hands. Max, his cells can control the current. As long as the current is generated, there will be a corresponding magnetic field. Find the current intensity that matches the required magnetic field band, and the effect can be achieved. In other words, Max can actually simulate the abilities of any mutant. And Shen Fei planned to implant Max's corresponding ability into his lungs after implanting the X gene. Coupled with Max's cells, it only takes a little bit to weakly control the bioelectricity, which can then be amplified by the X gene to achieve the effect he wants. You don't have to use your brain to control it, just set the gradient switch. Shen Fei put his hand on the computer again, his thoughts flowing out like diarrhea. Finally figured out a way to solve it. This will be a big breakthrough in his research and a partial enhancement. This has the potential to break through the limitation that each injected person can only master one ability. It doesn't mean that everyone has an evolutionary spirit, like him. Some abilities will cause rejection. But if only some organs control this ability, switches can be installed on the body. Norman, I need a test subject. Shen Fei called Norman and asked him to send the experimental body. He needed to see if this idea could work. Max, you will assist me in my experiments these days. A few days later, Shen Fei kept looking at Max's genetic map in the laboratory, or just the genetic map of his lungs. Max held his chest. He always felt a little strange that Shen Fei took out some tissue from his lungs. But this is what Shen Fei ordered, so he naturally has to do it. The key is that the electric man himself is afraid of water, which means that the electric current he controls has a root. If it is disturbed by water, it may cause a short circuit. But Shen Fei had to eliminate this part so that the current would no longer be released and only the bioelectricity would be controlled. However, he weakened his ability to absorb electricity. With Max's cooperation, he quickly prepared the directed mutation current cell solution. Shen Fei looked at the solvent in front of him. Storm's genes had already been incorporated into it. First, try to see if this idea is feasible. Conduct experiment. Assistants on standby began to push in the willing experimental subjects one by one. The injection of medicine began, and Shen Fei was responsible for supervising all experiments. As the medicine advanced into the bodies of the subjects, every subject soon had a painful expression on their face. One by one, the B ultrasound machines began to look at the changes in the lungs of the experimental subjects. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.